Thank you. We will get started. We do have a quorum. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Senator Lowenthal, Senator Hancock, Senator Huff, Assemblymember Brownlee, Assemblymember Buchanan, Assemblymember Hagman, Scott Harvey,
Present.
Kathleen Moore, Lynn Green, Pedro Reyes.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. I had hoped that we would have all the members here because I wanted to jump into, with the board's approval, I'd like to jump into item number 14. And we could wait till the other couple members show up. All right, let's go ahead and move forward then on tab 2, minutes. Been moved. Is there a second on the minutes?
Second.
Moved in second. Any comments, observations on that? Yes, sir.
I will abstain if I might. I was not present at the last allocation board meeting.
Okay. That actually makes 2 of us. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Oh, no.
Or do we
The
go
roll
roll call?
call.
Yes. Go ahead. Ms. Buchanan?
Abstention as well. I was going to abstain. Are we doing roll call?
We'll hold the minutes open.
So is what we can do is we can do a roll call vote and hold it open for the other members to come in and add on.
All right. Let's do the roll call on the minutes.
All right, Senator Lowenthal,
That date is March 24th, 2011, and what we have initiated was a survey to the districts and stakeholders as what kind of interest would they like for us, or topics or agenda they would like to us present at these joint workshops. So we actually had pretty astounding results. We had over 141 survey results, and so we're right now accumulating the survey results and working on a proposed agenda. And so we would definitely share with our board members what the proposed agenda will be rolling out at the March 24th workshop. Again, that's the day after the board. An update on the seismic evaluations from the 9 school districts participating in the evaluations. We originally received $200,000 grant from the Seismic Safety Commission. As a result of the engineering studies, we have expended about $162,000. So staff is in the process of preparing a preliminary report to the commission in early March and assess whether or not we have the ability to use the excess funds available for additional evaluation. And again, staff will be presenting a detailed comprehensive report at the March SAB. 2 more items. Since the governor declared that the buildings, the 11 properties that were going to be sold as a result of the prior administration have been terminated, that actually did terminate the surplus notification to the 1,000-plus DGS employees that also impacted 8 of our employees. And so the Department of Personnel Administration sent out additional letters basically terminating those original letters that were sent out, surplus notices that were sent out to 8 of our staff members. So that's good news for our staff. And the last item is we wanted to share with you is an update on the external audit item. I know it was brought up last month as far as what progress we've been making, and we actually have another follow-up meeting with the Controller's Office on March 3rd, and we'd be happy to report out the result of that meeting at the next board meeting. With that, I open up to any questions.
Members, any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reyes. Regarding the update on seismic evaluations, as we were just discussing down in my office before we came up here, we've been asking for a number of months to have a substantive session scheduled to discuss the seismic program and really to get to the science. And I think we're going to find out how complicated this is when we get to some of our appeals later today. So I would actually like to move that we do schedule a substantive meeting on the issues around seismic evaluation, and that we ask the department to confer at least once with a working group, which would include FEMA, Division of State Architects, OPSC, obviously, the American Society of Engineers, and some representatives of the field who have had experience with these issues, because the liability issues interacting with the financial issues and the scientific issues of what it means to make various declarations about the quality of school buildings when consultants make them or whether the state makes them, I think are very important. So I just didn't want this to be passed by as meeting the request of the board that we actually do some very careful planning about this complicated issue.
So you're asking that we put it in an agenda in the future time where we can devote some lot of time into this issue for
Right,
notification?
and that the board also, OPSC, confer with
With the appropriate parties.
broader range
Okay.
of people. Yeah.
Okay, we can do that. We can work on the agenda on that in the future. Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, let's lift the call on the minutes now that we have everybody here, please.
All right, Senator Hancock? This is to approve the minutes.
I actually had a change I wanted to make in the minutes.
Oh.
Is there an amendment? Was that
Could we,
a motion that you made? To do
well,
that?
She's, I think the way I took it was as a request that this be put in the agenda, and I think we've directed staff to do so. I don't think there's an action needs to be taken on it. I think it's a very reasonable request. And as a chair, we want to make sure we go on record as.
Because of things coming up today also and how difficult and complex they are, I strongly concur with.
Yes. Okay.
okay.
So going back to the minutes?
Could we delay this item?
The minutes?
Actually, yes. I'm sorry, but we were downstairs having this discussion,
It's okay.
and I did have some specific language
Okay.
to change. But I was also hoping that we could move up agenda item 14.
That's my next move, and I just wanted to clarify.
Good work.
In fact, I was waiting for everybody to be here to take item 14. And just basically, with the board's indulgence, I would like to move to item 14. It is my understanding that the board had approved that there be an election of the chair and the vice chair. I got my binder on Wednesday of last week, got to it on Thursday, and it's at that time that I realized that the election of the chair was not in the agenda, and we do not have, at that point, we did not have the 10-day notice. So with the board's indulgence, what I propose we do is we have the election of the chair, the election of the vice chair. However, the chair's election will not be valid or voted on legally until next month's meeting, and we will ratify it as a consent item. So we'll take the vote, and it does not become valid until next month. The reason for that is that we can't put it in the agenda, it's not an agenda item. But it is symbolic, and I'm putting it out there. And I think that's the best legal compromise on how to deal with this.
Thank you, Mr. Symbolic Chair.
Yes.
In that vein, I would concur and would like to nominate you as our permanent chair. You having well over a decade of experience with the Department of Finance and another decade of experience working in many areas of important areas, policy areas for the Assembly, and working for, I think, over 5 speakers in the Assembly, and find that you would be perfectly qualified and perfectly suited to chair this committee over the next 2 years. And with that, I would like to nominate you.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Do we need to take a roll call? It's a symbolic roll call because we will ratify it in the consent item next month, but please take the roll.
Senator Lowenthal?
Aye.
Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Senator Huff?
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Buchanan. Assemblymember Hagman. Scott Harvey. Kathleen Moore. Lynn Green. Pedro Reyes.
I'll abstain, I don't know him.
You don't know what you're
He's
getting.
not sure what he's getting into, no. Thank you, thank you. Okay, with that, again, it's not valid until next month, but we do move on to the vice chair election, and that will be valid. So,
Mr. Chairman,
Hancock?
I would like to move that we appoint Senator Lowenthal the vice chair of the board. He's a member of the legislature. And has been on this board, I think, longer than anybody else for a very long time.
Is that good or bad?
Okay. Oh, all right.
Okay. Any additional nominations? Okay. Please.
Senator Lowenthal. Senator Hancock.
Aye.
Senator Huff. Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Buchanan. Assemblymember Hagman. Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore. Lynn Green. Pedro Reyes.
Aye.
Carries.
Thank you. Now, Senator Lowenthal may have to leave us for a conference.
Right, conference committee in about 25,
Okay, just going to give people a heads up on that. Okay.
15 minutes.
Is-
Oh, no, we have
Thank you for your indulgence on that. I know it was an important matter for the board. Consent item, consent calendar.
Yes, this consent agenda is ready for your approval.
Second?
Moved in second.
Let's bring up Morongo.
Questions, comments? Comments from the public? Here are none. Please call the roll call.
Senator Lowenthal.
Aye.
Senator Hancock. Senator Huff. Assemblymember Brownlee. Assemblymember Buchanan. Assemblymember Hagman. Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore. Lynn Green. Pedro Reyes.
Aye.
Carries.
Thank you. Tab 5. Yes, Senator.
I was just wondering if, I believe that there's an assembly member here, Assemblymember Cook, for
Yeah.
item 8, whether we could take that out because he is here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. Okay.
Item 8.
Number 8. Mr. Morales?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In May of last year, the Morongo Unified School District submitted an application under our Facility Hardship Program for a conceptual approval to replace the Joshua Tree Elementary School. During the course of our review, staff determined that we didn't have all of the necessary components to be eligible for a facility hardship, so we returned the application to the district. The district then subsequently submitted an appeal to the OPSC in November last year, and that is the item before you today. Existing statute allows school districts to request funding under the Facility Hardship Program when they're faced with extraordinary circumstances that are beyond their control. In these rare cases, the board does have the authority to provide funding to mitigate the health and safety issues instead of the traditional new construction modernization programs. The school facility program regulations further clarify that the board shall consider such factors such as proximity to an airport, major freeway, electrical facilities, high-powered transmission lines, dams, pipelines, and other factors, including deficiencies required by the Division of the State Architect to be repaired. Now, since the inception of the school facility program in 1998 through the middle of 2006, neither statute nor regulations included specific language to allow for seismic mitigation. Now, this was changed through the passage of AB 127, and it created the seismic mitigation program. Proposition 1D then further allocated $199.5 million for that program. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because there's an important distinction to be made between the seismic mitigation program and the other health and safety issues under our regular facility hardship program. The school district did come in and apply under the regular facility hardship program. They didn't pursue funding under the seismic mitigation, which has its own set of criteria. Facility hardship program, over the past several years, in fact, as far back as 1998, staff has used the definition of imminent health and safety, and that is something that you're going to hear today in terms of this definition and how it came about. The regulations do state that there is a threat. We've been looking, in our records to find out when we established this definition of imminent, but it is consistent with what we've required for all projects. We rely on engineer reports to determine that there is a health and safety issue, and because we're not experts in all of these areas, we also rely on another governmental entity to concur that there is an imminent health and safety issue, again, because we are not experts. In this particular case, the school district did submit several reports that identified some trace fault lines. And just a little bit of background on the project, and I know that the district is going to speak to it, but the district was pursuing an addition to the site, to the Joshua Tree Elementary, as well as modernization. During the course of some preliminary testings, they identified the several trace fault lines that are on the site. There was geotechnical reports and the California Geological Survey reports that both concurred that very little of the site could be built on for human occupancy. Now, again, this was related to adding buildings. That was what we call the first phase. But the second phase was, well, what about the buildings that are currently there? And are they able to be there, or should they have to be demolished and replaced? By the way, we do have the state architect here who will be talking a little bit more about the details of that criteria. But simply put, the building code does allow buildings to remain on an existing site, even if they are on a trace fault line. Now, they can't add new buildings for human occupancy, but it's our understanding, and again, Mr. Howard can explain this further, that they can remain in the buildings and they can do a certain amount of work to these buildings as long as they don't exceed the current replacement value. And this is the type of information that we use to determine whether there is a threat, a health and safety threat to the buildings. We understand that the district cannot add on this site, but for purposes of qualifying for the facility hardship, we took a look at, well, is there an existing health and safety issue, or is this simply, not simply, but is it a matter of, in the event of an earthquake, there is potential for surface rupture. Those are some of the information that we use. Now, we did take a look. Originally, we had, again, the California Geological Survey reports, and then we had a letter from the Division of State Architect that concurred with these reports. Again, when we looked at this information, we were looking at it, and we realized that this information was based on adding new buildings and the fact that the district can't add new buildings on this site. So then we took it a step further to try and look at it from purposes of qualifying for our program. And again, the program, it's been the past practice that districts have to demonstrate that there is an imminent health and safety issue. And because we didn't feel that the letter from the Division of State Architect identified an imminent health and safety issue, we returned it to the district. We have attached the district's arguments, and I know they're here to speak to that, so I won't get into their arguments. But we do want to point out that even though the district, in our eyes, didn't meet the criteria for facility hardship, they do qualify for funding under our other programs, namely new construction, which means that they can add buildings to a site, and modernization. The Joshua Tree Elementary School site did generate modernization eligibility, which means that they can use it if they want to abandon and replace that site on a different school site. So that's just a little bit of background, but we do have, as well as the district, we also have the state architect here with us that can answer questions specifically as to the nature of their letters. But the district is requesting that that their facility hardship conceptual approval be approved, and if the board does approve the facility hardship, on stamp page 176 on the bottom of the page, there's some additional conditions that we have typically requested from school districts that they must follow. Again, this is in the event that the board approved the facility hardship. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions on our analysis.
Anybody on the board have questions? Yes.
I just need some clarification if I can. I heard during part of your comments that they could not add new facilities on the site. Then I heard you say later that they would be eligible for new construction. I'm trying to understand how those two statements work together.
That's a good question, Mr. Harvey, and I apologize if I didn't clarify that. They would be eligible to use new construction eligibility on a different site to build, if they choose to abandon and replace Joshua Tree Elementary and build it on a different location, they could use new construction eligibility.
That's all I needed, clarification. Thank you.
Okay. Please, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the State Board of State Allocation Board. My name is Mike Walker. I'm the microphone.
Oh, no, that one.
Here, use this one. The big long thing? Yeah. Okay. My name is Michael Walker. I'm the Chief Business Officer for the Morongo Unified School District. And on behalf of the Morongo Unified School District, we're a bit nervous here. I want to express my appreciation and the opportunity to present our request for a conceptual approval to replace Joshua Tree Elementary School. Being the business guy, sometimes we get detached from the school, so I thought I'd just give you a little brief outline of the school. It's a K-6 elementary school. It's in the Mojave Desert in San Bernardino County. It is the home of our early childhood development for severely disabled kids, ages 3 to 5. It's a wonderful program there. About 95% of the population is economically disadvantaged. It has our third largest population of homeless kids. We've got 17 great teachers, and it's just a wonderful school. Just to give you one indicator, we had in San Bernardino County last year, 175 schools were in program improvement, and I'm sure we're all painfully aware of what that is. Joshua Tree Elementary School is one of 7 schools in the county to get out of program improvement. It always reminds me of kind of like, the Steinbeck's California. It's just a great place. And those people worked so hard to make that distinction. We felt we had an obligation to work equally hard to try to get them the best possible facility we can. Now, where were we? How did we wind up getting here? In 2002, we did a master plan. And when we did that, we looked at Joshua Tree Elementary School and a number of schools. We found that the facility at Joshua Tree looked more like a collection of dilapidated portables than it looked like a real school. So the board, the superintendent, made that one of the priority schools. In 2005, we were able to pass our first ever citizens vote on a school bond after numerous failures. So now we were in business. So we identified the 7 of the 17 most needy schools, and we went to work to start making these schools the best things they could be. And everything was going great. We did and the issue here is the geotechnical studies. We did that on all the schools for the first phase. 6 of them passed with flying colors. We actually moved on to doing the geotechnical studies on the next phase. They passed, except when we got the geotechnical study on Joshua Tree. And one of the points I'm trying to make here is that we're not sitting here saying, oh, we've got all of our schools because all of our schools are close to faults. They are, all 17 of them. But every single school so far, with the exception of one, has passed the geotechnical studies. And I don't have access to the numbers, but I'm sure if you had your staff look into it, must have been hundreds of projects that this board has approved that they've had to do the geotechnical study on, and they've passed. So our argument is that this is not a routine occurrence. This is a very rare occurrence, and it's unique, and we have been put into a catch-22 that has no escape. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we went into 7 phases, and we said, as was pointed out earlier, we're going to build brand new classrooms for these kids. We're going to get rid of these old 1970s portables, and this is going to be a great facility. Then it came up, the shockaroo, that we could not come close to passing the geotechnical study. So we said, well, how bad is it? Maybe we can only not use part of the campus. And I'll refer you to the booklets we handed out. There's an inside folder, and it's got a picture here that shows the faults that go through Joshua Tree-L. Now, that has 39 identified active faults running through one elementary school, compared to 0 at all the other schools that we have. 39 running through one school. It's massively fractured, the land on that school. And all we've got left in there is parts of 2 parking lots to build on. So we can probably, accommodate a half a dozen cars. It is a dead site. Now, when we start applying the rules that we're told that we have to follow by OPSC, DSA, et cetera, we now knew that we could no longer build or modernize at that facility at all, forever. So we had no out outside of looking for another facility. So what did we go to do? We went to try to find a way out, and as a policy issue, I'd just like to mention, it came up several times, the seismic mitigation. The seismic mitigation law is currently written is of absolutely no use to us. Most of the people talk about, well, you don't qualify because the building type is not a type 2 and you don't meet the acceleration. It's irrelevant to us. The critical factor for us is that these buildings cannot be mitigated. They are unmitigatable. There is, if you had not $190 million but $190 trillion, you still could do nothing for Joshua Tree Elementary School because money is not the issue. We can't do anything on that site. We have to get off the site. So therefore, we went to the only possible program, which is facility hardship. And we started to apply to that. And we got our letter of concurrence from the Division of State Architect. At that meeting in November of 2009, they told us, and they presented this picture, which gave me butterflies in my stomach, and the structural engineer explained to me what would happen when the multipurpose room had a seismic event. So at that point, and at the recommendation of the Division of State Architect, we abandoned the multipurpose room. So that lost us our kitchen, no more school plays, no more assemblies. We took our library and gutted it and converted that into an ad hoc kitchen multi-purpose room, if you can even call that, because it can only take 60 kids out of the 380. Even today, the kids are eating outside in the lunch in this weather. And that is, so we are now far worse off because we tried to do something good for these kids. We're now in a far worse position than if we'd done absolutely nothing. And we're in a catch-22 because then they say that, well, all these earthquake faults allow you to do absolutely nothing here, but if you want to move anywhere else, well, we're going to add in this new thing that's not in the regulations. We're going to add in this thing called imminent. And I dare anyone to find that anywhere. So now they're saying you're dead in the water here because we don't use the word imminent. But if you want to move, you're dead in the water because we're now going to add in this additional requirement of imminent. So we're nowhere. So now we ask about, well, what does it really mean to be imminent? Because it's not in the code. It's not in the board policy. It's not in any type of regulation we can find, but it's dooming us, and they're giving us this past practice argument. Well, our argument is that part of it is that this past practice is inconsistent to begin with. Because if they really, truly always apply an imminent test to a facility hardship application, why do you do a pipeline? Is that pipeline imminently about to explode? Do you know that the welds are all faulty and it's going to blow up within the next 96 hours and therefore it's imminent? No. You know there's a potential risk. Just like the seismic faults on our campus are a potential risk. The same thing for train tracks. The same thing for an airport. The same thing for a highway. You're afraid a truck may go off with toxic chemicals. There is no imminent test there that's passed any more than our faults. It is a potential risk. And this board has routinely approved, as they will, obviously I don't have to tell you, but you meet that criteria for what it means to be a hardship facility. And the language says clear and simply that it has to be a threat to safety health and safety threat, to students and staff, and we meet that repeatedly. And if I quote what we were given by the various agencies that were also mentioned here, if I go to the California Geological Survey, they stated all observed faults should be treated as active and therefore potential hazards for a surface fault rupture. And we, as I said, identified 39 faults. The school may experience severe damage in the event of an earthquake, including rupture of the ground surface, foundation cracking, and vertical uplift, and that's by our geotechnical engineers. The Division of State Architect, quoting in both of their letters, the surface displacement, and I quote exactly, could cause catastrophic collapse of the permanent buildings. To continue, MPH structural engineers, I quote, significant life safety hazards for students and staff exist. MPH engineers again, certain sustained heavy structural damage will occur. And then finally, DSA again. DSA concurs with the opinions expressed by both the structural engineer report and the California Geological Survey. And the last item, just to drill it home one more time, the proximity to the earthquake faults is a health and safety risk that cannot be mitigated. That is a quote from DSA. And that is where we are. So they've got us on a campus that says you can't build, you can't modernize, you can't improve the safety, and you can't move off. And that's where those kids sit today. And I'm saying that we have met in an overwhelming way the requirement that is in the code. And the requirement in the regulation says it has to be a hazard to students and staff, a health and safety hazard, and it does meet that. And we've met it over and over again from anyone who's looked at that. And so in closing, I would just like to say we respectfully ask the board to grant the conceptual approval for Joshua Tree Elementary School. We accept all the conditions that have been stipulated. We respectfully note the time is of the essence, and we sincerely thank the board for their support in this matter.
Thank you. Mr. Cook.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for adjusting the schedule so I could talk. I think we all got multiple committees and hearings, and we're all buzzing around here. First of all, I'm not an expert on geology or what have you. Senator Huff knows that I'm a historian, as he was allegedly many years ago. Many years ago. So I want to talk just very, very briefly about the history. I was a history professor because I live in Yucca Valley, which is very, very close. And we've had some pretty good earthquakes out there. April 23rd in Joshua Tree, 1992, 6.1. Then, of course, we had the Landers quake, which was originally 7.3. I think they downgraded it to 7.1. By the way, that was at 3 minutes to 5 in the morning. And I have been through a number of earthquakes, and that one there, I've spent time in combat and everything else, and that definitely put the fear of God in me because it just would not stop shaking. Anyway, 3 hours later, or maybe it was 3 hours and 6 minutes later, we had another one at Big Bear, which is not right next to Joshua Tree, but it's close. And 6.5. I mean, and I could go on and on and on. There's the Hector mine quake, which is out on the Marine Corps base, which is adjacent to Joshua Tree and Landers. That was a 7.1. That was in 1999. And we experienced 60,000 aftershocks. Now, did we have tremendous casualties like there was in the Northridge quake, like there was 2 days ago or 3 days ago in New Zealand? Mm-hmm. No. Why? Because you don't have the population, you don't have the large structures, except, or those concentrations of populations, with the exception of schools. You look at this drawing here. You know, I spent 26 years in the Marine Corps. It looks like a bunch of machine guns firing all at once right under. It's very, very scary that we have our kids, our teachers, our future in perhaps the most dangerous part of my district. So it's a big deal for me. I'm not going to come down and try and bore you or give you any, the experts are all here. I'm worried about one thing. I'm worried about the kids. I'm worried about the health and safety. And I'm worried about the fact that this has happened in the past. It's going to happen again. I've been out there to that school to see some of these buildings. They have a brand new combat center, an Iraqi village, they call it out there. It's in better shape than the school. And they do not have those fault lines directly under it. So I would ask that you look at some of the historical evidence. I don't have all the other data in terms of that. All I know is I've lived there. Yeah, and I've been there. That's my home. The fireplace fell down. All the glass. And, we're fortunate. The fan. I was waiting for the fan to come down and clip me, and I wouldn't be boring you right now. But anyone who's gone through an earthquake, and then you go through 60,000 aftershocks. I swear to God, you talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome. Anybody who's been in an earthquake area, I think every time the ground starts to rumble a little bit, there's something that goes on. And this is the environment that we have in this kids here. And now this data is, okay, kids, this is the environment that we want you to excel at, do the best we can. And I would hope that you would take this into consideration. Thank you very much for allowing me to testify.
Thank you. Do the board members have any questions? Is there any additional public comment? Mr. Morales?
Mr. Chair, I would like to ask that Mr. Chip Howard, the state architect, if he could come up here and clarify. Again, we're not the experts in this area, and I just want to also reiterate the fact that we're very sympathetic to the district situation, but perhaps Mr. Howard can explain their letters and the rationale and give us a little bit of an insight in terms of the fault lines.
Please come forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Board Chair. Howard Chip Smith, Acting State Architect. And I can't explain to you, I think I can explain the objective reasoning behind DSA's ultimate decision, in this case the second letter. I will agree, I think that our letters lack clarity, and towards that end we are making changes internally in terms of our letters being written from headquarters rather than issued from the regional offices. But with that said, we have looked at this quite a bit lately and had determined that an objective definition of our determination would be whether or not the existing school building possesses existing conditions such as damage, dry rot, that are required by code to be remediated and pose a threat to the health and safety of pupils. In other words, not to diminish the potential risks associated with this particular site, but our objective analysis and decision is whether or not existing conditions, deterioration or damage exists that the code does require. And when I say code, I'm speaking to Title 24 building standards that we enforce for schools, whether or not those conditions exist and that the code would require that they be remediated. So with that, I think that clarity is perhaps not there in the letters that we've written in the past, but that's what they were attempting to say.
Okay. Ms. Buchanan?
You know, it seems to me like we have ourselves in a situation here where they've had to abandon the multi-use room because it's not safe for the students to be in the school. There's nowhere on the site where they can build. They have buildings that were built in 1958, so they're 52 years old. When I look at this, I think it would be a waste of taxpayer dollars to try and modernize the portables or the buildings, and the kids need a school. And they're caught in between all this. If they were eligible for seismic dollars, they would get the 50% match, the same match they're going to get under the Financial Hardship program. if you take a look at projects we've approved under the emergency repair program, and I would say having a multi-use room you can't occupy. Certainly, if you could have emergency repairs there, it'd be nice for the students to have that. We're approving playground equipment. We're approving removal of graffiti, those types of projects in the emergency repair program. And this is a situation where you have an entire site that's not buildable. We got into the issue with the school in Pittsburgh, and I do believe that this is very similar. So I can understand a strict interpretation of the law, but clearly if the buildings were occupiable, you wouldn't be abandoning them. And therefore, I believe it's up to the board at some point in time to step in and make a decision to either move the project forward or deny it. And I believe that it should qualify for the financial hardship grant. So I'd like to make the motion that we approve the appeal subject to the conditions that have been outlined with staff.
Second.
It's been moved in second. Yes, Mr. Harvey.
On that motion, Chip, I'm going to blow through the eminent language because I too see it nowhere in statute or regulation. But when you read the entire regulation that controls this section, it indeed says that we have to take a look at the health and safety of pupils that may be at risk. It says is at risk, as a matter of fact. But it goes on to say factors to be considered. And here's where I'm struggling, and I want to ask you some follow-up questions, because it says we should be looking at certain things when we make this determination. And it indeed is health and safety of pupils is at risk. It says, including structural deficiencies required by the DSA to be repaired. And then there's a separate section on seismic. So sounds like you have a little more jurisdiction, a little more freedom to interpret what has to be structurally repaired, and that's the term. Is it true that DSA said the multi-purpose room has to be abandoned? And if so, what did you base that on? And why are you now saying other portions of that school site, same fault lines, don't meet the test, structural deficiencies required by the DSA to be repaired? This is what I have to focus on, is the regulation. I mean, it is an absurd paradox to hear that you can't build on it, so new construction is out. Modernization may or may not be available. So here they are trying to salvage something, and it's all up to you. So tell me, did you find the multipurpose room should have been abandoned? And if so, what did you base that on? And why are the other structures not meeting that test?
In terms of the multipurpose room, I was not involved specifically with any determination of that type. I presume that the school district was working with our San Diego regional office and perhaps the regional manager on that matter. I don't believe DSA possesses the authority to dictate to a school district to abandon a school, but I don't know the specific conversations that may have transpired between the regional office and the school district.
Can I just add to that? Yes. I've had two different situations as a school board member where we had to abandon buildings. One was the only seismic project that you approved where soil samples were done and they determined you'd have liquefaction if you had a major earthquake, and the district did end up getting the the only seismic money that was distributed, but we abandoned the building immediately as a school board and a superintendent. You can't keep kids in a school if you have engineering documents. And another was frankly a new gym where we had problems and then got into a lawsuit with the builder, and that building ended up being abandoned for 2 years. So DSA may not have the authority to shut down, but if a school board or a superintendent have evidence and are being told by an engineer that a facility is not safe, they put that district at a tremendous liability if they go ahead and continue to occupy those buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Hancock.
No, did you want to answer?
Oh, I hadn't quite finished. The second part of your question was related to structural damage or deficiencies. And DSA, the context of the codes that we enforce, so the framework of our decision-making is Title 24, building standards. And within that context, structural deficiencies would include either structural damage or distress, but very objective, though, based. So either distress, deterioration, or damage would be how we look at the term or phrase structural deficiencies, as say, opposed to probabilistic risk-based events occurring.
Thank you for that clarification. Maybe you can't see this map, but since we're sharing maps, this one obviously shows seismic hazards in California, and it's almost the entire state. And San Bernardino is off here to the east, and it's in a lot of yellow. I assume the red is worse. If San Bernardino, if this particular school site had been in the red, do you think it would have qualified for your letter?
Yes, that map represents strong shaking potential. So the red would be the most severe, and the green the least severe shaking potential. It's actually that map, the large map, is based on a 2% exceedance in 50 years, which is event, which equates to a 2,500-year return interval earthquake. So with that large earthquake, that's also known as an upper bound earthquake in the report that was done for the school district in this case. So that upper bound earthquake is a 2,500-year recurrence event, and for that event, that map shows the severity of shaking, with red being the largest, green being the least risk damage. There are other hazards as well, but that is a strong shaking map as opposed to a faulting map.
Thank you. And again, they did not qualify for the seismic portion, which has 6.8, certain building type as the criteria. So they obviously were under that threshold, but have evidence from engineers and others that there are imminent, not an imminent, but fissures opening and buildings collapsing. But again, Chip, hearing everything you've heard today, you're still not willing, or choose not to because of your objective criteria, to find that there are structural deficiencies required by you to be repaired on this school site.
That's correct. I wouldn't, but I would concur there's potential risk.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I have Senator Hancock, Ms. Moore, and there's Assemblymember Brownlee.
Well, I think that having gone into this with the intention of using school bond money to build a new school and finding out that you can't build on that site, I would like to help you move forward and do that. I think that's important. What I don't understand is why you don't use your new construction, your bond for new construction, and move ahead that way. And I'm not sure how this intersects with conceptual approval of financial hardship. Does that put you to the front of the line over other schools, or why are we choosing a particular category?
Yes. First of all, we're not asking for financial hardship. We're asking for facility hardship.
Okay, facility hardship.
I
misspoke.
Because
I misspoke.
We wouldn't
Thank you
qualify
for correcting
financial
me.
because of our school bond.
Yeah, yeah.
The bottom line is we're not a very rich area. Our bonding capacity was limited. We were only able to get a $48 million bond for all 17 schools combined. Our developer fees are less than 10% of what they were during the boom times. And the only way we can go forward with our master plan has always been to leverage state matching funds. But as it exists now, we can't qualify for any state matching funds except for we have very limited modernization money, very limited new school construction money. There's no way that we could
Because
build.
you've used it up, or
Well, that's
because
right,
of what?
because when we passed the bond, we told the taxpayers we were going to help all 17 schools. And we've already done 6, and we're in the process of doing the others. If we were to take every cent we had and throw it in the Joshua Tree, we then would say the other 10 schools are gone.
So you would have no new construction money left?
We would have to use every eligibility we have.
Double counting.
And then again, also, we would be, and then, yeah, thank you. We would also be double hit, because now they would forever count every single classroom in Joshua Tree as a beautiful, wonderful classroom. So when we came up for eligibility counting, they would sit there and say, well, you voluntarily left Joshua Tree Elementary School, but the way we keep our books, you've got a classroom, you've got 20 classrooms right there, and you're not eligible for this because you've got this wonderful facility here in Joshua Tree that you're not using. So it's a double end. But
Well,
can I just go back?
I think we could deal with that, don't you think?
That's what the facility hardship does.
Yeah.
That's what the facility
That's
hardship
what
does.
facility hardship does, but
It makes us
So
whole again.
okay.
That's the way we deal with it.
But could I just clarify one thing with what the state architect was saying? We have never had and do not now have any argument whatsoever with the buildings. We have never said anything was wrong with the buildings. What we're saying is that it doesn't matter what kind of building you have, whether it's a fire trap or the most beautifully built building in the history of man, nothing can survive on this site. And that is what we're talking about. It's the ground that is the killer here, not the building. The example that someone gave, I know I'm not an architect or any really smart guy, but it's like saying you're on frozen ice on a lake, and your car's sitting there, and they're saying, well, you just had a tune-up, and the car is only 2 years old. We can't find anything wrong with the car, so there is no risk here whatsoever as the ice cracks underneath the car. Well, the building is not the issue. It's the ground. It's the ice the car is sitting on. It's the ground that the classroom is sitting on. And again, I just want to keep emphasizing about a policy issue regarding your seismic mitigation program. We could never, ever qualify whether they said that the type of buildings are the ones that are exactly built in Joshua Tree Elementary School in San Bernardino County is our standard. We still could not get 1 penny because these buildings cannot be mitigated. We cannot ever mitigate, we can never fix any of these buildings to make them safe. It's impossible. And it's not because of the building. It's because of the ground. And there's no way around it.
Ms. Brownlee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate Senator Hancock at the beginning of the meeting requesting that this issue be not this particular school district's issue, but the issue in general relative to earthquakes be agendized for us to have further discussion on it. I think the Superintendent for Finance makes a very compelling argument here, which compels me to support the motion. On the other hand, we have, the conundrum for at least for me is, looking at this map. I know, and I was a school board member in Santa Monica and Malibu during the Northridge earthquake. Fortunately, that earthquake took place when kids weren't not in school. But that was very, very scary, and to witness it firsthand, I do know what it's like to be, I haven't been in war, but I've had post-traumatic syndrome from living through some earthquakes. So the conundrum here for me, too, is to know that there are other school districts that are potentially in the same trouble as this particular district. And so this is a compelling argument. I'm going to support this motion today, but it also, I struggle with the support because we're here to evaluate, look at regulations, and try to be fair. And I feel like by supporting this today, I know that there are other districts out there that this vote, I cast a vote that's being somewhat unfair potentially to other school districts. And so I welcome future discussion because with this map right here that talks about the potential shaking for California, we've had earlier discussions based on the earthquake retrofitting funding that we do have that school districts haven't really been able to utilize because measurement is so high, and why we see all of this red here. Most of the school districts don't meet the shakeability criteria to qualify for that funding. So, so I think we need to have further discussion around this issue. But for today's purposes, I will be supporting the motion. Oh, and I want to say one more thing, and that is, as we here in the legislature debate over the value of regulations, I just have to say, in this particular case, I think regulations are proving good because they're highlighting where the health and safety of children might not exist. And so I just had to put that out there for that.
Thank you.
Make that point.
Ms. Green and then Mr. Hagman.
Yes.
Just a comment. Sorry. Just a comment. We are not concerned about the condition of the buildings. And it concerns me that we bring DSA into this with a limited ability to comment on this. And we have letters from Geological Survey, we have letters from an engineering firm. The concern I have is that our expertise as a board is relatively limited, and we're getting advice in an area that we're not concerned about. And so I have a procedural concern about all of this in that we're not getting the information that we needed in order to make the decision. But in that, I agree with Assemblymember Brownlee that in terms of what we do have before us, fairness concerns the vote, and I will vote for it.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a lot of things have said, so I won't repeat some of it. But I think that's what this board's for. Is I find this out, and being a legislator as well, is that a lot of times with the best intentions, we make rules and laws and regulations trying to fit everybody in one box or the other. But life's not that clear cut, and there's always going to be exceptions to every rule that we have to look at individually. And that's why I appreciate about this particular case. If you broaden the rules and regulations, you'll have everyone is going to be able to qualify for for more money than we have. At the same time, you do need to have the ability to look at each individual case and say, this makes sense. This is a prudent thing to do or not a prudent thing to do based on the information given to us. So I appreciate the way the rules are written and what the steps were taken. And, but as those exceptions come up, I think that's what we're here for on the board, is to hear those exceptions and try to sort them out to the best of our ability and try to do what's in the best of our constituents and taxpayers' mind. And I'm for supporting this measure at the same time as well, because this site is unbuildable. I mean, really basic. It's unbuildable at this point. Where do you move on from here? I do have one question, if I could, though, sir. One of the conditions, you said you approved all the conditions, but one of it is that the site would be sold. I was just wondering, just out of curiosity, if you had any kind of estimates what that site may be valued at this point? Yeah, you're not going to put too many gas stations on it.
Well, obviously, we've just made such a wonderful pitch for someone to buy it, but we would go to sell it, and I would like to make it clear, and the state architect has too. There's one standard for health and safety of students, and there's another saying we could have made this a maintenance facility, we could have made this a warehousing facility, and so if we had the money, but we don't. But I'm just saying, and that means that potential exists out there in the private sector, and we would. And there is a appropriate method for selling the property, and I believe we give 50% back to
so
the state. Or
right now we're looking at the state allocation board. We're looking at a figure is $44.7 million, and then minus whatever half of what you sell it for. So we bring that value down even more. I would go ahead and confirm with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I share the concerns of the present setting, because most of California is built on, I grew up in Ventura County and I've experienced a number of earthquakes. I think this is one of those issues where it's a different pot of money where the request is coming from and where you could have gone, but then you go into the issue of your local revenues to do the match, and I get that as the issue. But we do have a motion on the floor, and we have a second. So, Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Senator Hancock?
Aye.
Senator Huff?
Aye.
Assemblymember Brownlee? Aye. Assemblymember Buchanan? Aye. Assemblymember Hagman? Aye. Scott Harvey? Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Lynn Green?
Aye.
Pedro Reyes?
I'll abstain on this one. Thank you.
Carries.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I do want to acknowledge the presence of Senator Bob Margette from Arcadia on the front row. He was formerly served on this board. So thank you, sir, for your presence.
Thank you. Good to be here.
You're a masochist. No, I'm kidding. Sorry. That was audible, huh? Yeah, okay.
And you did that on mic.
I know. Okay. Okay, we go back then to tab 5. Ms. Silverman?
Yes, if I can direct your attention to tab 5. And I need to turn to tab 5 as well. We wanted to highlight, obviously, the importance of what we've been doing over the last few months. And again, this report reflects the releases, the cash that's going out in the street to fund projects. And it's a good story. It's a good story for this program. If you're not familiar with the report on stamp page 147, March 2009, this program was the benefactor of $528 million, which was great. We had no fund releases to report in this category this month. That we still have a small balance of $70,000. And then in April 2009 category, we actually received $1.4 billion in cash. As a result of the bond sales, we released $23.9 million last month. So we still have a residual balance of $72.9 million. And then the lower chart, if I can direct your attention, October 2009 and November 2009, we received $509 million. We dispersed $99 million, and we have a balance of $131 million. On stamp page 148, turn the page, please. The top chart, November 2009 and December 2009, we received a disbursement of $111 million. Last month, we didn't disperse any funds in this category. We still have a $27.5 million fund balance. And the middle chart, March 2010, we received $1.35 billion. And we actually dispersed $59 million last month with a bond balance of $252 million. And November 2010, we actually received $1.4 billion from the last sale, and we actually dispersed $428 million, and we still have $964 million of bond proceeds. Again, this reflects what's happened over the calendar month, January 2011. In total, we dispersed $610 million. A good chunk of that funds that was released, $428 million, was a result of priorities and funding, and the remaining $182 million came from the various pots. Again, as I shared with you earlier in my executive officer statement, for priorities of funding in December, we actually received over $1.1 billion in fund release requests. So what you will see next month is, again, an escalation of the funds being dispersed for actually reflecting for February activity. So if you can direct your attention to page 150. We actually have these bar charts we've been illustrating to the board. The number, the colorations, and patterns obviously show where the money's being dispersed. Again, we still have $1.4 billion in our bank account as we speak. We initially received over $5.3 billion between the 2009 and 2010 bond sales, and we've dispersed we dispersed over 84% of those bond proceeds. So we still have 26.9% of the bond proceeds in our bank account as we speak. Again, speaking to the success of priorities, that green shaded bar actually will be shrinking again as a reflection of additional releases, at least another $500 million posted last month. So with that, if there's any questions on this report?
Yes, Mr. Harvey?
I know you've answered this question. I'm sorry I can't remember. I continue to be baffled as to why the propositions 55 and 47 languish as it relates to expenditures. Is it because we don't have labor compliance programs, and if we correct this and get it out of the way, will some of this money move more quickly? Are the criteria so much different than the 1D? I mean, what makes only 31% or 70% of these bonds moving where we're in the 97, 99 in other categories? Some of it's perhaps the nature of the sale, because it's, 09, October rather than April. It's commercial paper. Is it interest rate? I mean, what's driving the lack of drawdown in some of these bond sales?
Well, maybe a simple explanation is, and it's not specifically related to Proposition 55 or 47. When there was a fiscal crisis, we actually had $2.4 billion of unmet need. We actually already had apportionments out there, and it took at least the better part of 2009 for the various sales that we had to cover that $2.4 billion balance. So those projects, once they had their cash, they had 18 months to come in to perfect on those projects. So there is some of the 18-month timeline associated with some of this cash, the older pots. That's why perhaps there's not being dispersed as quickly. But again, the latter sales of part of the March 2010 and then the November 2010 does reflect the new 90-day turnaround time, and that's why those particular pots of funds are being dispersed quite rather quickly.
So in some cases, they haven't perfected their apportionment, and they have time yet to do so. So maybe this money actually will go out the door, and if they don't meet that deadline, the board would have the ability to talk about where that should be redistributed.
That's correct. That's correct. We have a spike. There's about $220 million. If we have our timelines on rescissions, and it's not reflected anywhere in any of the reports, but there's about $220 million that's sitting out there in October of this year that are set to expire. So again, encourage those districts to come in with their fund release requests when they have their 50% of the contracts in place. So again, we can do our best to encourage those districts to come in.
And hopefully we will, but if they don't, then we have the ability to decide where whatever residual is left should go.
That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Ms. Buchanan.
Thank you. So, all the information is available in different reports. Would it make sense maybe to, on this report, also indicate the apportionments that have not been funded? I mean, that would...
Yeah, we can present that item next month, and we can. I'm not sure how detailed do we want to get. I mean, we can actually.
Even if you just had a column here, if we knew what the outstanding apportionments were, that would give you
a better sense of what's actually in the balance.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, we could certainly do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good idea. Anybody else? Moving on.
Okay, tab 6, status of funds. And this report really reflects what's remaining in the bond authority category. If I can direct your attention to page 151, the top category reflects Proposition 1D. We actually received $7.3 billion in authorization from the voters. And this month we're reflecting $60.5 million of unfunded approvals being approved this month. There's a small adjustments going for proposition, new construction. We actually had 25 modernization applications, and we actually had one high-performance application that was being processed, and a number of different CCI adjustments that are going through Proposition 1D. And the center category is Proposition 55. We had $10 billion authorized by the voters. There's a positive amount because we actually are posting some corrections, so we have a $20 million adjustment here. And the lower category, the blue shaded area, is Proposition 47. Again, we have $11.4 billion that was authorized by the voters in 2002. And we are actually processing, again, some CCI adjustments and some rescissions. And with that, in total, $36.3 million in unfunded approvals that are part of the consent agenda. I can direct your attention to page 152. There is also activity in the top category in Proposition 1A. So in total this month at the consent agenda, we are processing $39.4 million that was approved already by the board. And then the center chart is the emergency repair program. It's, again, we're bringing forward $59.2 million of unfunded approvals, and that represents 155 applications. So in total, we have $282 million of unfunded approvals that are sitting out there. And if I can get your attention and turn to page 153, again, this is a summary chart of the authorizations and the spend down, what we have apportioned. So for Proposition 1D, we actually apportioned 67%, which is the blue shaded area of the bond. And the maroon shaded area is $743 million that's sitting on the unfunded list, so that represents 10% that's sitting out there. We have still 23% of Proposition 1D that hasn't been authorized. So as we process applications, that amount will be shrinking as well. On page 154, Proposition 55, larger blue shaded area. The original authorization was $10 billion. We've apportioned 91% of that. 5% still remains on the unfunded list, and we still have 4% of the bond authority that's sitting there. Page 155, Proposition 47, we've expended 98.6%, and we actually have 0.9 sitting on the unfunded list, and we have $65.8 million that's sitting in bond authority, and that represents less than 0.5%. The new construction chart is on page 156. What we did here was summarize all the new construction authorities from Proposition 1D, 55, and 47. Again, as we apportion projects and take them off the unfunded list, which represents new construction, 92.9 of that original authorization has been expended or apportioned. We still have 3.6% sitting on the unfunded list, and we have $507 million that's sitting in unfunded category, and the unauthorized category, which we still have authority. We wanted to introduce a new chart, which is on page 156A, which shows the activity and emergency repair program. We have some extent provided cash to the program, and it's a blue shaded area, and what we shared earlier is we still have $282 million of unfunded approvals, and we're still processing application. We still have $174 million in authority left to process additional applications. So with that, I would open up to any questions.
Any board members have any questions? Any comments, any public comment on either tab 5 or 6, status of fund releases or status of funds? Okay, hearing none, we move forward. Tab 7, this item has been withdrawn. Tab 8, we've dispensed with. Tab 9. This is priorities in school construction funding apportionments?
Yes.
Ms. Silverman?
Yes, page 195, we wanted to highlight to the board, again, as a continuation of the October 2010 priority funding round. Again, the board provided $1.4 billion in apportionments in December. We actually provided $103 million in apportionments in January. And with that, we're bringing forward to the board 18 additional projects that represent $40.6 million in apportionments, as stated in Attachment A. Part of the priority round is that we actually had an open round from October 7th to November 8th, 2010, in which districts were required to make the following certifications. The districts understand that the time limit on the fund release shall be no more than 90 days from the time of the apportionment. In addition, the district acknowledged that failure to submit the completed fund release authorization within the 90-day period would result in the projects being rescinded without further board action. As part of the rescinded application, it will revert back to the unfunded approvals at the bottom of the unfunded list and could not be guaranteed for bonding authority. The applications will be received by a date certain. In that case, it could result in multiple rescissions. And at the time, the district was also acknowledging that they were waiving the 18-month standard requirement. So as part of the follow-up report to the companion item that we presented last month, we wanted to share with the board that as a result of some rescissions that we brought forward and acknowledged at the last board, that we still have $61.4 million. And if you could turn to stamp page 196, that will show you the summary of the cash we had available. We actually have a few companion items that if the board decides to approve some items, that you reduce the cash available in the companion items. And so with that, we're bringing forward $40.6 million, and we still have $12.2 million available. Again, that represents 18 projects. So if the board chooses to take action on Attachment A, which is page 197A, those are the list of projects that would be provided apportionments. The approved applications receiving state apportionments are required to complete a 5005 containing the original signature and be received by the Office of Public School Construction by May 24th, which is part of the condition of the apportionment. And if the district doesn't comply with that and fails to submit the proper documentation with the timelines, then the project will be rescinded post May 24th. With that, our recommendation is to approve the state apportionments for the project shown on Attachment A, declare that all applications receive apportionments are subject to the new construction grant adjustments. In addition, declare the October 10th priority round close and direct staff to distribute the remaining cash as part of the cash management discussion next month. With that, I open up to any questions.
Any questions, board members?
I'd move approval.
Second? Okay. Would you want a second and then another comment, or?
I'd prefer to make the comment.
Okay.
But if someone wants to second.
Somebody want to second it? Somebody move on? There's been second, moved in second. Yes, comments?
This is my concern, is that we have 61.4 million in funding available today. And I, for one, would want to see that we are apportioning that funding today. I think it's important to school districts to be able to utilize that funding. And I'm wondering, the 12 point, is it 12.2, 12.8? That is not recommended for apportionment. Can you talk to us a little more about what companion items and how much those companion items are?
And tucked away in our item is we have a companion item for CALEXICO and Belmont. If the board approves or supports approval of those items, it will reduce the cash available.
So what I would like to propose then, and I have no problem with the motion in the second, is that if we do not apportion the funding on those items, that we revisit this item, so that if in case, depending on the outcome of those, that we have another look at the cash available to projects that are waiting in line.
So we can bring back those projects for additional apportionments as we go down the line, if we chose to. If the board doesn't act on the last recommendation to close out the round, I think the only concern we had was some of the certifications maybe getting stale, but that's all conditional. We could certainly bring back additional
I'm saying
items.
We would complete in this board meeting and then close the funding round. But I, for one, would hate to leave some money on the table that a school district could utilize. So I'll wait to see the outcome of the other items. But to me, we have 12.8 available this board meeting that could go out to projects that could be helping communities and helping schools.
And the other concern, too, is, Lisa did bring up a good point. We also have another point is we can go to those items, take action on those items, and then come back and revisit this, should the board choose. The other issue is we have limitations on how much we can fund, because the $12.2 million, when it's broken down in its various pot, we have $3 million available in Proposition 1D, $1.4 million. I mean, there's splinter pots of money available in Proposition 55, $1.1 million available in Proposition 47, and about $6.4 million available in Proposition 1A. So they're split all over the place, and you couldn't fund the next project in line, technically.
Okay, so that's the real reason for the recommendation then,
Right.
not and that
We
there is not enough to go down to the next project.
Fully fund the next project.
However, if we take action on the future items, you're going to cobble together those dollar amounts and fund them from each of the different pots until it reaches the amount. If it was approved by the board, then is that the intent with it?
Well, we assumed in our calculations that the board would approve those other items, and so that's how we drew our calculations. So if the board doesn't take action on those items or does not approve those items, then obviously we have additional cash to play with. So
Let me, just so we could just put this item over, move on to the others, see what we've done, and then that will then reduce the dollars accordingly. We can
table this until
we
deal
can,
with the
that works. We can come back to this. I know there was a motion and a second. Are the movers of the motion second okay with that? Yes, okay. All right. So moving on then so we'll put this over.
Where are they?
we're in tab 11.
Tab 11.
Are we doing charter school or straight up? Lexicon. Okay.
Well,
Thank you.
Tab 11 is a request from Calexico Unified School District. This district was part of the earthquake that occurred in April of last year, and on the consent agenda today they had an unfunded approval for a modernization project at Jefferson Elementary School. The school did sustain damage during the earthquake last year, and the board previously in April 2010 had granted the district accelerated funding for a different project, a high school project, to assist with the cash flow needs so that the earthquake repairs could be completed. So the district is asking for consideration for accelerated funding on this unfunded approval as well. The damages at this school site were in the ceilings, and the modernization project that they're requesting deals with some of the work that's up behind the ceilings. So one of the reasons that they've presented is that if they were to repair the ceilings now and just handle the earthquake damages, then they would have to rip out the ceilings to then do the modernization work, which is not maybe the most efficient way to complete the project. So the district is requesting that the board provide an apportionment for this project. And the apportionment is, we have a shell here on page 220 if the board chooses to do so. The apportionment would be made under the traditional 18-month time limit on fund release because this project was not eligible to participate in the previous priorities and funding round since it's just now getting its unfunded approval. It does bypass about 511 projects on the unfunded approval list, but again, they do have the cash flow issues in completing the earthquake repair work, and it would be a duplicate effort to have to do the project twice. So we are seeking the board direction, and we have heard from the district that if the request is approved, even though there is an 18-month time limit on fund release, that they would be able to come in sooner than that, perhaps within the 90-day timeline. So staff, the board could direct staff to provide quarterly updates on the fund release status until such time as the fund release request is made. And I believe the district is here if there are any questions, and I'd be happy to answer any questions as well.
Sir.
Yeah. Good afternoon. If I'd known all the topics that have come before me and our topic, all having to do with seismic activities, how I didn't realize today was Earthquake Awareness Day, and as an old school principal, I feel like running a duck and cover exercise here for all of us. But thank you very much. And with me, we have the Director of Facilities, Raul Martinez, and our Board President. I'm not sure she's back. She had stepped out a few minutes ago before you canceled it. Miss Gloria Romo, our Board President. But thank you very much for having this opportunity and the agenda item. It's very critical for us. We can boast, given that everybody else has been boasting. I don't think anybody in this room except the three of us have been through a 7.2 earthquake. So we've had the biggest earthquake of all. We're very fortunate, thankful for all the regulations in terms of building codes and everything else, not just for schools, but for civic buildings. And those, since we are on the border next to Baja California, those have impacted Mexicali, Mexico. And 7.2, which was right next to Mexicali, just south of us, only two people, fortunately, only two people died on a 7.2, given what we've just experienced in Christchurch. It's absolutely amazing. But thank you very much. And we also want to thank you for the help you've already given us in terms of, you know what, I never introduced myself. I'll get to that. We also want to thank you for the help you gave us for the in accelerating the funding for Calexico High School. At that time, we did not request the acceleration for Jefferson because that assessment had not been completed and approval from DSA had not gone forward, and we've been able to do that ever since. My name, by the way, is Robert Moreno. For 11 years, I was born and raised in Calexico, by the way, as was Senator Huff. He was born in Calexico. He wasn't raised there, but he was born there. For 11 years, I was a superintendent for Calexico before I retired. Now I assist them with facility issues, and our superintendent would have been here, except he was just hired 6 days ago. Richard Fergali, some of you may have met him in the past at other meetings. He just came on board 6 days ago, and he said, Robert, you've been working on this project. You go ahead and represent us today. As our board president was telling me on the airplane as we flew up this morning, the important thing is bringing things back to normality at that school site. We've got all the the permanent structures are uninhabitable by students now, have been since the April event, April of last year. And we need to bring them up to par and get those kids back. Some of the kids, about 200 of them, are being bussed out of that area and bussed every day. And the ones that are there are in relocatables, not in the permanent facilities, do not have access to the offices, do not have access to the cafeteria. And we'd like your assistance on this. I don't know if you have any questions, but that sums it up.
Ms. Buchanan?
I was just going to move approval of the district's request for the apportionment. There's precedent in terms of the State Allocations Board has done this before. It clearly is a waste of taxpayer dollars to go in and make improvements and then tear them out to make additional improvements. And I would like to also add to that, though, that we do the quarterly monitoring and just urge you to proceed with haste to get the project completed so that the students have the facilities they deserve.
Second.
It's been moved in second. Okay. Any additional comments from the public? Any additional questions from the board? Call the roll, please.
Senator Hancock? Assemblymember Brownlee? Aye. Assemblymember Buchanan? Aye. Scott Harvey?
Aye.
Kathleen Moore?
Aye.
Lynn Green?
Aye.
Pedro Reyes?
Aye.
Carries.
Mr. President, I'd like to add on as voting aye. I would also like us to have a clarification, perhaps at our next meeting, of how districts that may now be passed by would, if they had fire damage or water damage and wanted to come and ask to be put at the head of the line too, what the procedure would be for them.
Fair question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next item, Ms. Silverman. Belmont.
Next item is tab 12. This is a request to amend an apportionment and switch bond source from Proposition 55 to Proposition 1D. Back in March of 2009, the school district entered into a lease-leaseback agreement. In October of 2009, the district submitted a funding application. As part of the funding application, the district certified that they would be required to initiate and enforce the labor compliance program. As we went through and processed the application, there was correspondence that was sent to the district from the OPSC. We did tell the district that at that time, Proposition 1D funding would be provided for the project. However, should Proposition 47 or 55 be provided, that the district would be required to initiate and enforce a labor compliance program. The project received unfunded approval on May 26, 2010. They received an actual apportionment at the December board meeting. And according to the district, as they were preparing to submit a fund release request, they discovered that the lease-leaseback agreement, although it did require the payment of prevailing wages and the tracking of certified payable records, it did not require the lease-leaseback agent to initiate and enforce the LCP as they had originally believed so. The school has been occupied in September 2010, and their staff did an analysis to see if there was additional funding that would be able to be provided for this project. We do have sufficient funds to provide them from Proposition 1D. So the basic request is to switch them from Proposition 55, which requires the labor compliance program, requires the district to initiate and enforce labor compliance program, to Proposition 1D, which it doesn't have the requirement since the district didn't initiate and enforce an LCP. Again, the district believed that the lease-leaseback agent was going to do this. They discovered that the agent did not. With that, we have a couple of options for the board. Option 1 is to approve the district's request, as shown in the attachment A. Option 2 is to require the districts to get a retroactive labor compliance program review by a Department of Industrial Relations approved third party. Or option 3 is to deny the district's request and require them to, and in exchange for the bond source from Proposition 55. One other thing that I do want to highlight for the board is that the board has switched bond sources before for other projects. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and the district is here to also answer questions.
Mr. Chair, if I might put a motion on the table. I think it's abundantly fair with the precedent. People have been dealing in good faith. This is a no harm, no foul. I would move option 1A.
Is there a second? I don't think there's an A. I think it's just option 1.
It's the district's request
Right.
to switch the funds.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I should not put a number on it. Look at mine.
Yeah, it was the same as mine.
Okay.
Are we clear on what I'm trying to do?
Yeah.
Option
one.
1, which is the switch.
Ms. Buchanan.
I have some questions because the option I was leaning to is option 2, and I can explain why. So the district has switched funds for other projects. Why did that happen with other projects?
What staff tries to do is when we look at a project, we take a look at which districts have certified that they will be required to initiate and enforce an LCP. If we have funding available from the 3 different bond sources, Proposition 47, 55, and 1D, we try to align those projects with Proposition 47, 55 to give them the additional grant. The projects that don't select that are the ones that we try to align with Proposition 1D because they don't have that requirement. We've had to make some bond source switching when during some of the bond sales to try and fund down the list because of the way the bonds are sold. Those sold a certain amount per proposition. We try to align the projects as closely as we can with the available cash so that we could go down the list in order. That was one of the reasons why we switched.
No, I understand that, but I thought you said this district had in the past requested to.
I'm sorry, no, the board has.
Other districts, okay. I'll tell you what my only concern is that, I mean, we have labor compliance laws for a reason. And when I have contracting firms come in and talk to me or labor come in and talk to me, I mean, one of the big concerns is the underground economy and the impact it has on people who are licensed, legitimate contractors doing business on a level playing field. And it just seems to me that if you're given money and you should be complying with the labor laws, then later on to switch, you know, I don't want to deprive the district of receiving the funds, but I mean, I just question, is it really unreasonable to have a third party come in and do the labor compliance to ensure that the contractors were complying with all the laws and requirements at the time that they were doing the business. They certainly still have to comply with prevailing wage, and if that's not a direction that, one, gets the district the money, but also provides some assurance that they were complying with it. I mean, because it seems to me you can't just, if you've given out money to someone to execute a contract and you assume that it's in compliance and you're not doing any checking at all, that there's some responsibility there on the part of both. So that's why when I looked at it, I thought option 2 was not necessarily a bad option. It sort of would meet the goals of both.
I can actually speak to your comment on that.
Mike.
You want to get the microphone?
Sorry, I'm Josh Hunter. I'm with Block Construction. We were the leaseback provider on this project. So it was very clear in the contract documents this prevailing wage certified payrolls would be collected and tracked and produced upon request. So we do hundreds of millions of dollars, you know, in K-12 construction. We are a union contractor, so this wasn't treated any differently than any of our other projects with third-party LCPs, just because the district hadn't contracted for a third-party LCP. So when the member said no harm, no foul, it's just a routine contract. Whether or not there had been an LCP in place or not, the same procedures were followed. The certified payrolls were available upon any month's requests. So I understand your point as far as fly-by-night contractors go, but we do have quite a bit of experience in this field, and we're very respectful of prevailing wage laws and certified payroll tracking.
Yeah, I'm not arguing as to whether or not the integrity of your company. I was just saying that if someone did go back and do an audit of that, then we would have the higher level of confidence there.
I'm Emerita Orta Camilleri, the superintendent. And before I just want to say thank you, first of all. Truly, this news came in December, and it almost felt like another Christmas because we are a continuing growth district. So certainly we have some pending projects that we are waiting to move forward. based on a decision made today. And I think that one of the things, as soon as we discovered that it was a technical paperwork error, we began working very closely with OPSC, and they have been very gracious in giving us time to work this out. Certainly, our goal is to look at moving forward. We are planning on future projects and have already decided we will do a third party. Simply because we now recognize the importance, and certainly to give us some flexibility in terms of future funding. But at this point, when we began to discuss the implementation for the prior project, it does present a timeline issue for us. So that's why we're asking the board to consider option one, knowing that in future projects we will be doing the third-party process.
Could you elaborate more on the timeline issue it creates for you if you're still funded?
The way I understand it, it's due by March 15th. If we were to do a prevailing wage for the prior project. If it's the future project, we will now put it into place, and we've already discussed that with Block.
And what would have been a reasonable date instead of March 15th?
Since I've never done one before, I'm going to have to turn to someone that knows how.
I'm sorry, the March 15th date was the requirement. The district received an apportionment in December. According to the priorities and funding rules, they have to submit a funding request by March 15th. That is the 90-day requirement.
So we have a motion and a second. Ms. Buchanan, your interest in two, is that a substitute motion or?
I can accept the motion. I just, like I said, I think when you switch it, it's an end run around the labor compliance laws, and I think the solution I would prefer would be to, and I guess we can't in any way change this, would be to allow them to switch funding to 1D, but at the same time require a labor compliance audit. If that's not possible, I don't want to harm the district, but I do think it's critically important that, if there were a way that the spirit of the law be followed there.
Thank you. Mr. Hagman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do like to, there's so many different school districts. I know how often some of our regulations and rules, especially when you don't do a lot of things all the time, do get caught up in administrative feats, and that's why I see what's happened here. I'm supporting the original motion, but I also want to say that at this point, if we do switch funding streams, nothing's being circumvented at this point. The rules and regulations are followed on the one source of funding. As set by the voters to issue those bonds, and those monies that should have been done with the third-party labor oversight will be still available for the next project that has to be done in that particular way. So basically, I don't think we're getting around anything. We're just kind of moving the different pools of money, which is not something that you like to do all the time because you want to keep track. And there's a lot of extra work for the staff to keep track of things going back and forth. And hopefully, there's not too many exceptions. But as we have as many a number of school districts as we do throughout the state, there's going to be bound to be some administrative errors now and then. And again, we have to look at each individual case separately.
Thank you. With that, is any other additional public comments on this issue? Okay, thank you. The move in second. Please call the roll.
Senator Hancock. Aye. Assemblymember Brownlee. Aye. Assemblymember Buchanan. Aye. Assemblymember Hagman. Aye. Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Lynn Green. Aye. Pedro Reyes.
Aye.
Carries.
Thank you. Okay, does that take us back to tab 9 then? And are you in a position to tell us how the numbers on page 196 should be amended?
Well, I think obviously the board took action to carve out the $11 million, and so that action brings us back down to, with the approvals today, $12.2 million available in cash.
Can I just ask, I'm sorry, CALEXICO was $3.8 million, correct?
Right.
And so, I'm sorry, I should go through the chair. I'm very
Ms.
sorry.
Now that you,
Keep
go
going.
ahead.
You'll ask it in unison.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Okay.
I'm assuming you're going to ask my question, but go ahead.
Okay, 12.8 was CALEXICO. The fund switching should be
Revenue
a
neutral.
wash, right? Revenue neutral, because whatever money they had, whatever fund they had received it from, it should be going back to. So, wouldn't we have more?
I'll let Michael speak to that.
The money freed up by CALEXICO and Prop 55 by doing the fund switch you just did is not enough to fund the next project in line within Prop 55. and that's why no extra projects can be added at this point.
Say that again?
The Belmont project put 8.7 million back into the Proposition 55 pot
Okay.
with the action you just took. That money is not enough to fund the next project in line. If you look at
Okay.
Page 200.
stamp page 200,
Mm-hmm.
right now the only project you can fund out of Proposition 55 is the one highlighted in yellow for 11.6 million. There's two other projects that fall on that same board receive date and application receive date. The project is just above it. It's for $2,289,000. And we don't have enough residual money in Prop 55 to fund that particular project.
I'm seeing the project below the line at 7.9. Am I missing something?
The line was actually drawn. The order of the projects weren't switched. It's been the existing unfunded list. When we pick those three projects on that board receive date, you'll see the board receive date's August 25th, 2010. There are three projects that have a November 2nd, 2009 receive date. All three of these projects belong to the same district, so they prioritized which ones they wanted in an order. And we do not have enough to fund that $10 million project, the middle one of the three.
Okay, I'm not tracking where.
Yeah, it's not being clear at all.
So Kathleen, by adding the $8 million back to Proposition 55, that just raises the bar that we have nearly, is it 11 million or $10 million available in Proposition 55. And so if you look at the Proposition 55, that page 200, those particular projects that Michael pointed out just above the line represents the critically overcrowded school projects. They're actually quite large in some, and we don't have enough residual cash to fund those particular projects in line. We don't have the exact amount. We're probably short about, I think, close to about 200,000 that we may be short on to provide at least one funding to one of those projects.
See the ending balance on the far right, the $1,499,000 in yellow? When with your Belmont action, that put money back into that $1,499,000 to bring it up to $10,222,147.
Her book is all screwed up.
That would be helpful.
I mean,
Well, no wonder. I
So-
didn't have the revision. I'm sorry. Okay.
Oops.
Is there any other possibility of funding a project today with the funds that remain?
Out of the $12 million that's stranded, half of that is in Prop 1A, and I've switched as many projects I can possibly do on the entire unfunded list from the beginning to the end to use up all the bond authority in Prop 1A to use that cash up, and that I've touched every remainder of their funds.
Okay. Ms. Brownlee, I don't think your question was answered.
Yeah, I think, so what I'm concerned about is for the decision makers, the treasurer who decides, when they're going to go out and sell bonds and how much they're going to sell, et cetera. If they see this balance, what does that indicate to them? Does that mean, oh, well, schools don't need it, we'll go sell some other bond because they've got a balance here and we'll wait, a few more months before we do this? And of course, we can't anticipate what their timing is going to be nor the amount, but
Let me
okay.
ask finance.
Chris Ferguson, Department of Finance. Given the nature of this program is a multi-billion-dollar bonding program, the limited amounts that would remain would not affect the decision of future bond sales in terms of providing funding to this program.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, public.
We are closing out this meeting, so it's over.
Good afternoon, Lyle Smoot, Los Angeles Unified School District. Am I given to understand that we're like $60,000 or $70,000 off of a project?
That's correct.
And your question is, will we take the project without the 60,000? Can I have about 10 minutes to call the district? Half of me says go, but I don't have the authority to actually say that. But I feel reasonably certain that given the opportunity to take a $10 million project, less than $60,000 less, we would absolutely take it, I'm sure.
Is staff confident with the numbers that that's what is there, or are we flying off the cuff here and we may
You can bring it back next month as a consent agenda, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
It's
Mr. Chair,
just-
can we just authorize staff to work that out, and they work it out with the school district to bring it back to us as just a pass-through? Because that's what we're kind of authorized, and that would be the next one in line if they could do it.
If they can do it within the existing resources, and LA Unified is willing to take the existing resources, then it has the blessing, and if not, then it sits there in the balance. Is that what I'm hearing? Is everybody okay?
Can we do that and vote closure?
Absent, you would just absent.
We can't actually technically vote on the item, other than bringing back the item if we can fund it partially.
I think it'll be part of the consent
Right,
item because
that's
it's
right.
not in the agenda, so
Correct.
we want to put it on the agenda, but technically vote on it and just put it as part of the consent with the agreement from LA that it will be, rather than just closing it out altogether. So it's sort of the same thing as the election of the chair, horrible precedent setting.
See what you're doing? And you've only been here one day.
I know, but I know at this point I'm still a symbolic chair. I can be,
We
I
expect
can be
you to become
removed.
the real chair. They actually do
But-
this a little better, okay?
So I want to hear from staff though. What's the downside of doing this?
No, I think it's better for us to do a full cash accounting, cash reconciliation of the switching of the funds now that Belmont comes back to 55, and truly give them the proper number, so then that way we can communicate to LA what the exact number is. If they're comfortable with the partial funding, we can bring that back to the consent agenda next month.
It's part of the consent
As
agenda.
part of the consent agenda.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? We don't have to take any action, just direction to staff, since it's not an agenda item. We really can't vote on it. But thank you. Thank you, Mr.
But we do have to
Hagner.
approve the.
We have the approval. Yes. Yes.
Do we need a vote?
Yes.
Need a vote?
Clarification. Yes.
So, point of clarification, we are closing this funding round today with this action. This issue will either resolve and come back as a consent item, or we will have 12 million remaining in the remaining.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
Just to be clear, we're voting on recommendations. The vote would be on 1 and 2 and excluding 3.
I didn't think we were voting on anything.
No. We have on tab 9. We do have approved the state apportionments. Those we can do. So the item that we're sort of allowing staff to go out there and to close it out in terms of what the dollars are, and LA Unified will then have a chance to say whether or not they'll take the haircut, given the resources available now as opposed to waiting until other resources are available.
And this item was tabled, but there has been a first and a second.
Correct. So we're going back to this item.
So
There have
just to
been
be
a first-
clarification of what the motion is on this item, which ones we're voting on.
As the maker of the motion, I would clarify that we are voting on 1 and 2. And the direction to staff to.
And 3.
Isn't that,
Exactly.
isn't that
And
3?
three.
That's
Direct-
3.
If you add 3 where we were, the second sentence is direct staff to disperse excess cash in the future depending on the outcome of cash management discussions. So
It was
even if
declare
you're not-
the round closed. Do we need to strike declare the round closed and do the rest of 3?
No,
I'm
I
still
think-
confused
I
about.
think it's important that we close around.
Is it?
We close around with the amendment of the LA Unified added on.
Right.
To the
So
extent
it's,
that
you're carving out LA.
That's
Everything else, all right, so then I am back to 1, 2, and 3 with a carve-out for the direction we've given staff on LA Unified.
So in other words,
It's
we're
carved out, though, because the second sentence here allows them to come back in the future depending on the outcome of cash management.
But this, the carve-out is specific, though, to the LA deal that we're going to be shorting LA a few $1,000s, and they're willing to take that haircut in the interest of getting the funds now
I apologize. I thought that was going to come back to us next month.
On consent.
on the consent item.
And this still would allow them, going forward, to do the cash management once we take action on that subcommittee's work.
Right.
So we're closing out, but we're making an exception for
LA.
LA.
Yeah.
For the allocation for Proposition 55 funds.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Oh, we got it?
Yeah, we got it.
Okay, we're good?
Call the roll.
All right.
Are we okay?
Can we do
I
the
think
roll?
it was moved and seconded. It was amended. Does this? Okay. Moved and second.
Call the roll.
Please call the roll.
Senator Hancock. Aye. Assemblymember Brownlee.
Aye.
Assemblymember Buchanan. Aye. Assemblymember Hagman. Aye. Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Lynn Green. Aye. Pedro Reyes.
Aye.
Carries.
Thank you. Okay, so we now then move to tab 13.
No, tab 10.
Tab 10, sorry. We jumped around. I knew I was going to. All right, thank you. Tab 10. We keep changing.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to see if we can bypass this a little bit based on research and talk to different folks. Can I make the motion for 180 days, and unless you want to make this a big report? Option 1.
Option 1.
I'm sorry, which item are we on?
Second, it's the charter schools.
It's charter schools only. We're not talking about changing the 90 days. Oh, yes.
Okay. Moved in second. Any comments? Public comment on this? Any questions? Call the roll.
Senator Hancock. Aye. Assemblymember Brownlee.
Aye.
Assemblymember Buchanan. Aye. Assemblymember Hagman. Aye. Scott Harvey.
Aye.
Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Lynn Green.
Aye.
Pedro Reyes.
Aye.
Carries.
Thank you. Now tab 13. Labor Compliance Program, proposed regulations.
Ms. Tracy Sharp will be presenting the item.
Ms. Sharp.
Hello, I'm presenting the item on proposed regulations for labor compliance program. And these proposed regulations will provide a transition period in the school facility program regulations for school districts to change from the Department of Industrial Relations labor compliance monitoring program to a third party. The reason for the change in regulations was that the Department of Industrial Relations regulations were repealed, and districts were directed to seek out a DIR-approved third party to continue their labor compliance monitoring of projects funded from Propositions 47 and 55. To facilitate this discussion, I prepared a handout, a timeline, so that you can see the chronology of events that have occurred here to help the discussion.
Right on cue. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
So I'll start with a little bit of background that follows the timeline here. In November of 2002, Assembly Bill 1506 was passed that added sections to the Labor Code that required that all projects funded from 47 and 55 have a labor compliance program. And the labor compliance program must be performed by a third part, a DIR-approved party, or a DIR-approved in-house program. Then in 2009, and this, I apologize, does not show up on your timeline, Senate Bill X29 was passed. And this changed amended the 2002 sections of the Labor Code and established the DIR monitoring program. Districts could still use their in-house approved program, but they could no longer use a third party. And these this Senate bill applied to all state bond funded projects, 47, 55, and 1D. But it didn't take effect until the DIR's regulations were put in place, which occurred on August 1st, 2010. And all contracts awarded after August 1st of 2010 were subject to the DIR program. Then the DIR submitted a request to the Office of Administrative Law to repeal those regulations on October 21st of 2010. At that point, they began notifying the impacted parties, basically districts who were utilizing the DIR Labor Compliance Enforcement Program. Districts were advised to seek out a third party from the DIR list of approved vendors, if they were funded from Propositions 47 and 55. If they were funded from 1D, they didn't have to continue this labor compliance monitoring program. On November 4th, the Office of Administrative Law approved the repeal of those regulations. So these regulations are in recognition of additional time that a district might need to get that third party in place to continue their labor compliance monitoring program. Staff presented the proposed regulations at the January and February Implementation Committee meetings. We proposed amendments to the Fund Release Authorization Form, the Form SAB 5005, and 2 regulation sections pertinent to fund release and the audit. As I noted previously, the purpose of the regulations is to ensure that the transition is provided for in regulation, and these proposed regulations don't waive in any way the existing requirements in law for paying prevailing wage, etc. The sole purpose is just to provide additional time to get this third party in place. So with that, I'd like to direct your attention to the stamp page 233 that actually shows the changes that we're making to the regulations. The first section is a change to section 1859.90, the fund release process, because at this point, districts are required to provide documentation that they have an LCP in place if they're funded from 47 and 55 when they submit their fund release. So this section basically states that all contracts associated with the project as defined in Labor Code 1720, and Labor Code 1720 defines a public works project that were awarded between August 1st and November 4th. That was the DIR enforcement period. They must have a DIR approved third-party labor compliance program or their own in-house approved program if they were required to, and the reference there to Labor Code section identifies these projects as being funded from 47 or 55 no later than November 1st, 2011. Then we make the same statement in the audit section of the school facility program regulations. That's section 1859.106, the program accountability expenditure audit. The exact same language is proposed to be placed there. And then on attachment B, starting on page 234, we have the changes that we are recommending being made to the actual form 5005. Under general information, that same statement is included so that districts know which projects are applicable to this change. Then we've also changed part 5 of the form. The main change there is we are asking districts on page 235 to include their contract award date, because that is how we identify the projects that are impacted by this DIR enforcement period, is by their contract award date. And we've given additional space for them to include multiple contracts if there are more than one for the project. You'll see the exact same changes mirrored in Part 7 under joint use projects, because these projects could also be impacted, and a technical change at the bottom where we've asked for the districts to print out the name and title of the person signing the form, their email address, and their telephone number to facilitate communication should there be a question. So we presented all of these changes except for the Part 7 at the implementation committee meetings. We received consensus on these items there and are bringing them forward here today. There was a concern raised about projects that were immediately after the repeal of those regulations. For example, November 5th forward. could they be impacted adversely by the repeal. Staff is not aware of any that fall into that category at this time, but as I said, a concern was expressed, and we did not reach consensus on that item. So at this point, we're only bringing forward the up to November 4th. And staff's recommendation at this point is for the board to approve the regulations as shown in attachments A and B, and as well to authorize the acting executive officer to file these regulations on an emergency basis. With that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Before I take board comments, can I take comments from the public so we can have a different perspective here?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Tom Duffy for Cash. We have been concerned that there hasn't been adequate direction to districts in a period that's really verging on about 5 months. We've been in the hallway working, Mr. Diaz and I, on some language that we would suggest to you that could be utilized by the board for direction to your staff. I realize you have a regulatory process, and I'm not talking about putting this into the regulatory process. I'm talking about direction to your staff of inclusion of this language in the audit guide that would essentially identify that districts would have an LCP in place by May 1st of this year, that district would enter into a contract from the period of time when the CMU was basically pulled back, which was November 4th. So November 4th forward through May 1st, that any district entering into an agreement during that period of time would have an LCP in place by May 1st, that retroactively they could enforce that labor compliance program to make sure that labor compliance was in place. I apologize for the fact that what you have is a handwritten document, or you should have. We were working this out in the hallway just over the last hour or so with the assistance of a DIR attorney, so it's not simply layperson's language. We'd be happy to answer any questions. I realize that you have a regulatory process, and that's something that maybe you need to deal with your staff and the attorney, but I think it'd be really important for direction to come from the board to your staff to communicate with districts that this would be in place now so that districts would understand what the expectations are. We believe that this has gone almost 5 months without adequate direction. So the intent is that labor compliance would be in place based upon the prior law, AB 1506, that was in operation up through at least August of last year. Be happy to answer any questions, be happy to work with you and your staff. The intent is let's make sure districts know what's expected, that there be an LCP in place by May the 1st for any projects that have entered into a contract between that period of time in in November through May the 1st.
Before Mr. Diaz speaks, I think the first question I have is, has staff seen this?
No.
Was staff included in your conversation with Mr. Diaz?
They weren't included in our conversations outside just over the last hour because this has been emergent. We asked to meet with DIR and your staff there were a number of communications during the course of the months in 2010, but we asked to meet with your staff in December. We asked that an item come to you in January. We were concerned that there were not communications to districts. For a variety of reasons, it was put over and further discussions have taken place. So we have talked to them, not specifically about this language, but about the need, one, to make sure that there was a line of demarcation as to when districts would need to be compliant. And I realize that it's a shorter space of time than what was in their proposal, but we think that this is reasonable for districts to be able to comply with communication from your staff. And as the cash organization, we have communicated in the past with districts and will communicate again, but official action from the board to say this is the expectation, I think, is what's needed.
There's an implementation committee that apparently not reached consensus. So if the issue is brought up to the implementation committee and consensus not reached, I mean, does that qualify as having conversation with staff?
We were at the implementation committee, Mr. Reyes, and we brought up the concern about the time frame, and there was a discussion of bringing in this option, if you will, to talk with you. We have a high regard for the implementation committee and the people that were there. There was a recognition that something needs to be done, but I think you're correct. There wasn't necessarily a full-on consensus that was arrived at there. The cash organization represents school districts. We communicate with school districts. We want to make sure that what we believe the law in California should be, absent the CMU from SB 2X9, that 1506 requirements would be in place. And we really do urge you to take action, because although we've alerted districts that we believe that this is what they should be doing, there hasn't been any official communication from you as a body or from your staff as a body, at least to my knowledge.
Mr. Reyes, as chair of the implementation committee, what was discussed, and there was consensus amongst the IMP members that were there, which is in front of you right now. So that's the item of where the implementation committee had consensus of what's in front of you. There was another item brought up that Cash brought up that wasn't part of the original discussion, which I believe is what you're trying to address right now. And so there was no discussion really on this other than we need to have another discussion. Staff needs to get involved. OPSC needs to look at this and maybe have it come back to the implementation committee. But what you have in front of you in the language that was written was there was consensus, but this was not fully discussed.
What I have in front of me is what?
Sorry, tab 13. What's in tab 13? Tab 13, what was discussed at the implementation, and those who were there of the IMP, there was consensus on this language, of which Mr. Duffy's bringing up is another item that we had not, staff, OPSC, had not prepared anything for discussion on this.
Okay, Mr. Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council. This item was brought up at the Implementation Committee, in which, as a representative of the council, we had serious concerns with what the staff was proposing with regards to labor compliance programs, and actually just allowing basically school districts to have proof that they enforced, initiated, and contracted with a third party or did it in-house. The nature of a labor compliance program is to hold a pre-job conference and to monitor the public works project to ensure that their prevailing wage are paid during the construction of the project. Our concern was that given the ample amount of time that staff was recommending, that the school district would then get into construction, finish construction, hire a third-party labor compliance program or do it in-house, and then review payroll records, in which case there is no point to having a labor compliance program. We objected to that. The issue came back the following month. I was not able to attend, unfortunately, because I had a sick child, and they reached consensus. So the only reason that they reached consensus is because basically I was not there representing labor. We have then had subsequent conversations because we have our issues of concern is basically the commencement of the construction without the LCP basically eliminates the protections of AB 1506, which is what our members have advocated for with regards to labor compliance. We've had some meetings with Mr. Duffy and understand their concerns of our what these school districts are now hearing in terms of mixed messages. That being said, the language that is in front of you, which is tab 13, still presents us with that same problem. We've had a conversation outside with Mr. Wusam of the DIR to try to reach a consensus that would address the building trades concern, which is to have labor compliance during the construction and then prior to actual construction of a project for these projects that fit within this window. I mean, another thing that we're doing here is we're speaking in hypotheticals. We don't know exactly how many projects are impacted by this. One thing would be for OPSC or maybe DIR to provide us with the list, or maybe through communication from CASH to identify which of these projects are actually impacted by that, so that we're not creating regulations for the exceptions.
Ms. Sharp?
I would just like to add that before the January Implementation Committee, we sent out an email blast to districts asking them to contact us if they were in this window of the DIR enforcement period. We were given a list of approximately 7 districts by DIR when we met with them in November or December. From that, and then the additional email communication to districts, we were contacted by 8 more districts. So we know of a total of about 15 that awarded contracts during this period. And we received confirmation from all of them that they were in the process of switching to a third-party LCP, or they had 1D funding, so it was not required to pick up and move forward. And all of them, by this date, theoretically would have them in place based on their communications with us, that they are either already did or they were in the process at that time. That's the known universe of projects out there. Could there be others? Yes, there could be. We have not heard from them.
I'm hesitant to take action on the language that I'm just seeing, and staff has not had a chance to read and give me feedback. This is my first day on the job in this committee, and this is a significant issue. And while I'm somewhat cavalier on some issues, and I would be willing to vote on this one because it's labor compliance issues and it's important to my boss, I'm kind of not quite there yet. The fact that you two worked it out, while I appreciate that the two parties working it out, I always like to see our staff in those meetings, much like the way the legislatures like to see their staff on conversations from both parties when finance cuts the deal with the LAO. But that's just my gut reaction right now. I will, Mr. Hagman, Ms. Brownlee first, and then Mr. Hagman.
Well, I agree with the chair. I think it's prudent for us to just take a pause here and take a breath and make sure that we have all of the appropriate information before us before we make this decision. At the same time, I hope school districts understand the importance of compliance with LCP, and we get that message out loud and clear. But until then, I think it's important for us to kind of fully vet this. It makes me uncomfortable to have, this information coming up on the dais after years of making bad decisions based on that situation. I think it would be prudent for us to defer till the next meeting.
Mr. Hagman and Ms. Senator Hancock.
Thank you. I was just going to throw a question out to maybe all 3 groups here. Apparently, we have contacted school districts who have projects. They are, in your mind, complying with what you want them to comply with at this point. I was going to say, from cash or from the labor, would anybody see a problem for this to go back and come back to us next month with maybe some of your suggestions and timelines put in place? Is there something that may fall through the cracks right now that I'm not seeing at this point? It sounds like the schools are pretty much requiring on it. It sounds like this is a regulation change that may affect stuff in the future, that there are some disagreements between major stakeholders here. It sounds like there may be a solution on the table at this point, proffered to us, but it has not been to the vetting that we would all feel comfortable with. I'm just wondering pros and cons from each group, and let me know what you thought.
If I, Mr. Hagman, if I may try to answer your question, as soon as we had understood that the SB 2X9 was being pulled back in terms of those regulations, we as an organization communicated with districts to say it's not official, but we believe you should continue to comply as you did in the past with AB 1506 requirements, and we've continued to say that. That was back in November. We will communicate, if the board doesn't take any action today, we will redouble that effort and communicate again. And I realize bringing in a handwritten document to you is not the normal order. But we have a concern that there has been now almost 5 months since there has been anything really official for districts to really understand. So we were in, I can't speak for Mr. Diaz at this moment, but in the hallway we had looked at each other and talked about a postponement if that was necessary. But we believe in the wisdom of this board. This board is very deliberative and very careful, and you look out for all parties as you can. So if it's the will of the board to put this over so that there can be something official so we can work with your staff, Cash will certainly do that. but we will also communicate that this discussion took place and that districts need to move on in terms of making sure an LCP is in place.
Follow up, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. And just so I may understand this, basically we're talking about this one time period that basically took out the third party to review the contracts, basically. And then when that got turned over by regulations by DIR, now the old standard, which is the third party oversight, is in place. That kind of took back November 4th when that happened. The ruling came out, but obviously it takes a while for school districts to adjust, to hire that third party, whatever. And what you're trying to do is finalize a date certain when this program has to be in place, and a date certain when going backwards and forwards to make sure that compliance was there. So from this point forward, we have compliance, and to have some kind of date where you pick to go backwards to look to see if compliance was done.
Yes.
I would assume these school districts who have these projects have been well communicated, probably through several sources, that this requirement is in place because on November 4th it kicked out, and so by the old function of law, that was the case. It's just they don't know if they're going to get in trouble if they didn't have it done December 1st or January 1st or February 1st by the time they got that third-party component in there, because we haven't given the direction when that cutoff date is. The staff's proposed a date of November 1st, 2011. It sounds like that's pretty far, much further off than the May 1st date that you're suggesting. But what else am I missing in here for all the paragraphs? Is that just the date changing, but also to be notified going backwards, or?
It is, if I may answer from our perspective, it's to give districts a date in the future to say you must have a program in place. If you put a program in place before that date, but the contract was actually let's say, on December the 1st, that you have the ability to go back and to check to make sure that prevailing wage was paid during that time. Any violations were covered because, by virtue of the language we suggest here. We believe districts can do that, and they will have to have some work with contractors to do that because the language may not be in a contract.
Maybe get the documents together and things like that.
Yes.
And such.
And boards enter into a contract with a labor compliance entity. So it's something that's typically noticed, as you know, at the local level, just like this board. If something's noticed, Brown X followed and all that. They may do ask for quotes from 3 or 5 or 6 entities. Just some time frame is what we're envisioning to need to do that if such is not in place at this time.
And correct me if I'm wrong, other members too, for most of my dealings with school districts in the past and present, I don't know anybody does anything because they have requirements for prevailing wage anyway. It's just whether or not they keep the records a certain way or not with a third-party auditor versus if they do it in-house at this point. Correct?
Well, the contractors are keeping records, not the school district.
Okay, so it's who keeps the records and who's oversight, basically.
AB 1506 put in place requirements that made it a very proactive force of people or third party at the school district level to comply. So the policing was taking place at the local level rather than at the state level. And what we're saying is that policing needs to be reestablished if there's been an interruption.
Down at the local level again with a third party.
Member, yes, that is correct. But you have to understand that also the use of a labor compliance program has been in place for these 2 bonds, and the experience has already been there. There's a website on the Department of Industrial Relations that lists all the certified LCPs and qualified. So basically, a school district right now, whether they were, basically knew that as of November 4th, the old regulations, the old law was in place, they could go out and begin that process to hire the third-party labor compliance program. So providing a year out, even providing a May 4th, is way too much time. You're talking about a meeting, 30 days notice, Brown Act, all that can be done within weeks. We understand that. So the more we wait, the longer we push it out, the more problems we're creating because we're allowing more projects to fit within that window.
And again, part of my, hopefully you indulge me here, Mr. Chair, but I'm just understand this. So the difference between what staff's proposed, which is the November deadline, and what you guys worked on the hall is this May deadline. Okay, we're at toward the end of February right now. So even if you decide that, take that action today, and if a district wasn't compliant at this point, they would have to have the 30-day notice and stuff like that. That cuts it close. I mean, so you can't really put it off and still concur with that May 4th deadline if you want to do that because they want to have the 30 days. I'm hearing also from staff that from their survey of the projects they have, that those contracts, those 17 school districts are in some form or the other following 1506. It's just not official because we don't have the rules and regs, but they technically are following it. I would agree that it seems like a year or for all the way out to November probably too far. At the same time, you can't reduce it anymore if we actually physically make a regulation to what's proposed, because if there weren't in compliance, you wouldn't be able to do it legally, give notice to do it. So it sounds like this the earliest date you should physically put in there is the date you suggest. But a year out to November may be too long. But I don't know what the board's pleasure is, but at least I understand it now.
Before I go to Senator Hancock, Finance, you have a comment?
Chris Ferguson, Finance. Yeah, just to clarify, the regulations that are in that binder address only those projects that were affected by the regulations that were put in place by the Department of Industrial Relations and then suspended. They do not affect any project after that date. The proposal, the handwritten proposal you have in front of you, would allow projects after that date until May 1st of 2011 to comply with an LCP. It is the Department of Finance's position that we would support the regulations in the binder with the caveat that we move it to a July 1st date of 2011 for those projects. And we would posit that upon suspension of those Department of Industrial Relations regulations, that a school district was legally required to have an LCP in place for any contract let after that date.
Thank you. Senator Hancock?
Well, that's confusing again. I thought I was tracking very nicely with Assemblymember Hagman's questions. And my question was simply, does putting this off for a month give any window of opportunity for work to go forward without a labor compliance agreement? Or are the two of you in agreement that putting it off for a month is not a problem? It does seem to me that we ought to move the date up.
I think what staff has relayed, Senator, is that there's projects that are complying, and we're looking at the possibility with this regulation. And obviously, the more I think about it, the less sense it makes to actually have anything done here, and to just say, you have to comply with labor compliance programs after November 4th. If you have that, do it immediately. Maybe even July is way too long. I mean, maybe it should be, April, right? I agree with you that it sends a very confusing message to the rest of those that don't fit in that window, that labor compliance is not needed until May 1st.
So if we
July,
took the
or July,
position that labor compliance was needed on November 5th, that by default, as soon as the previous regulations were suspended or eliminated, the old rules kicked in, 1506. That would mean the only issue would be to go back and make sure that everybody who started a project after November 5th actually did have a labor compliance agreement.
And Senator, if I may respond, that's essentially what we, the CASH organization, is attempting to ameliorate, because we believe that that is not reasonable when the agency that was to implement the new rules under the new law, under SB 2X9 with the CMU, the districts that had been following 1506 were now believing something else would take place. And for the state to make a change dramatically and say the next day you must comply with the old law is confusing, and I believe it's unfair, especially if it would damage their funding source. And remember, during this period of time, we were in a mode, Senator, where you, as a board, were trying to make sure that you were having projects go out and get under contract, and you were funding these projects in the 90-day window. We actually met with the chair of the Allocation Board and others starting last June identifying that there may be pressures because of SB 2X9 implementation and what you were trying to do with funding priorities. So we anticipated that there may be some issues and began to discuss that. There was indeed an issue, and what we're after here is that there be no harm to any district that was not within that window period. And I agree with what Finance said. That's certainly what these regulations address. We're trying to make sure that projects after that period of time, and you've funded in December $1.4 billion worth of projects, that no district is harmed there. Because the state really, it may have changed because DIR said, whoops, there was a mistake here, but effective policy change from the body that basically apportions the funds and then audits the expenditure of those funds, there was silence there. That's why we asked for a meeting with the chair and DIR and OPSC in December, because there was no discussion of this, and we believe that some official communication from the board was important. So what we're asking for is, and if you don't take action today, that's fine, but what we're asking for is an official communication from the board that a labor compliance program needs to be in place by a particular time, and we have basically agreed with the 60-day period. It's approximately 60 days for all projects, those that were under the CMU window and those after.
Ms. Silverman, you had body language that told me you wanted to say something.
Well, I think really all we try to do is bring clarity. And you're right, Cesar. I mean, it's going back to the old rules. That's really what we're talking about. And I think the package here really outlines going back to those rules. I think we were trying to provide a date because we did hear from some of the community. We did meet with Cash. There were some concerns. But again, we're talking about what the package here is trying to accomplish. I think we have a narrow gap of projects or school districts that may have this issue, but they knew the rules were going back. They knew the rules were going back to a labor compliance program. So, I mean, I think staff is open to being flexible, of changing that date from November 1st to something else, and I think we need to move this package on. I think we've communicated with districts. I think the implementation was trying to provide some dates certain, so that way they gave some people clarity as far as where, if the audit issue came up. I think we shared with you, Mr. Duffy, with DIR, if there's some issues that came about, then obviously we would work closely with you and DIR to try to resolve those issues. And I think that's exactly what that package is doing today. And I think at some point we have to move on.
Thank you. Hold on, Mrs. Kaplan. Hold on. I have Ms. Moore, and then I have Ms. Buchanan, and then Mr. Harvey.
I think this has been an incredibly confusing issue for school districts. And we have two laws on the books, one that removed the LCP program from being monitored at the local level to it being monitored through the DIR. And then in November 4th, that was the regulations around that ceased, and we say that school districts are now to comply with the old law while the new law still sits on the books. I think it's confusing to school districts, and I thought it was important that we should take action today so that it is clear, particularly because we have apportioned about $1.7 billion over December and January. And I had one question, and that is, many people have said that everyone should have known that it changed back on November 1st or November 4th. But how would districts know that? There wasn't an action of this board. There was perhaps promulgation by the DIR that said we're not moving forward with our regulations, and that's what stopped this. That's what we have this group of projects. But I'm not sure that all districts know as of November 4th, they're now under the new, the old law, the new old law. And so I think that's very important that we say that to them. I'm curious, because we never talked about it when we apportioned $1.7 billion. LCP was not an issue we discussed. It's been an underlying program all this time. 47 and 55 have always been under LCP. What changed And it was a dramatic change to be at the state level, because then you're all those third parties out there and all of those, the infrastructure that existed for that program was told it's moving to a centralized infrastructure. So I'm wondering, and I do think that November is a long time for projects that we now know, maybe 18, maybe more. We don't really know that universe yet. And I think that we could have agreement probably on a more current date. But I also think that we should be empathetic to districts that maybe after November 4th and prior to this meeting today have been confused and don't know what they should be doing. We say they should be doing LCP because it's the law, but we also created a lot of confusion when we promulgated regulations and then we ceased those. Not this we, but another we. So I'm wondering if there's a compromise that says that the group of projects, that I think you call them Project A's, that you all teed up for a November date. We moved that date to July. And that all projects after November 4th are well notified that they are 47 and 55. They are under the LCP program. However, if they let a contract between November 4th and today, and they are in a problem and they did not have an LCP in place, well, let's surface those as well. And we say today, everyone is under the LCP program. That's the underlying law. But come forward to us, and the board will hear any of those problems that may have ensued because of the, I think, confusion out there for school districts. I don't know. I'd be curious your response or others' responses on that.
I'd like to go to Ms. Buchanan now, then Mr. Harvey, and then Mr. Hagman, and then turn it back to staff. You've heard a lot of comments from folks, and then you can address all those issues.
I know you've done a great deal of clarifying, so I just ask you to indulge me along with everybody else. And I think I was the one that asked for this chart. So if I understand everything correctly and read this chart correctly, prior to August 1, 2010, AB 1506 was in effect for labor compliance, correct? And AB 1506 allowed you to either have an in-house program or to contract with an outside labor compliance agency, right? But the local school district was responsible for ensuring that one of those two things happened for labor compliance, right? Then in 2009, SB 2X9 passed. That took away the ability to contract with a third party. So you either had to have a program in-house or a contract with the DIR, correct?
As of August the 1st.
As of August, well, yeah, it was passed in 2009, became effective August 1, 2010, okay?
And you had to be given
Right.
approval by DIR
So-
to rent it in-house.
Right. But basically your two options were in-house, okay, because DIR said you could, or DIR, but DIR was in control there, okay. So then in October of that year, less than 2 months later, the regulations were repealed, and it says here that school districts were directed to follow 1506. So were school districts then notified that the SB 2X9 was no longer effective and they had to follow 1506? Because I'm picking up from some people that districts didn't know. Did they know? Were they notified?
That information was taken from the DIR website.
Right.
And on the website, they posted their repeal package, and they also posted a series of frequently asked questions. And one of those specific questions was kind of a what do I do now? And the direction was, depending on your funding source, you seek out a third party.
Okay, so.
But the only thing
We don't know if districts were actually sent a letter, though. It was on their website. Do we know if they were sent a letter notifying them of this change?
I don't know the specific form of communication from DIR unless.
We actually have BIR in the audience, so.
But I also know on behalf of OPSC that an email was sent out and a blast was sent out to school districts that the regs were repealed afterwards. I do know I have that email.
I'd just like to know. Okay. So, were school districts notified of the repeal of SB 2X9 and that they needed to comply with AB 1506?
Let me answer it this way, if you'll indulge me. There were certain. My name is Mark Wissam. I'm the Deputy Director of Legislation for the Department of Industrial Relations. And in contracts which were entered into after August 1st were subject to the SB 29 new program for school districts which complied with that obligation to contact DIR and provide funding. We did contact those distinct schools about our repeal and notified them of what to do next.
Okay. So in other words, all the contracts that were out there prior to August 1 that were subject to AB 1506 went by those rules. Contracts that were out there between August 1, 2010 and October 21st, 2010, any of those contracts, you notified those school districts to tell them that DIR would not be doing the monitoring and they had to comply with AB 1506.
To the extent the school district came to us with the request to utilize.
So there could have been one. So then on November 4th is when the regulations were actually suspended, and it says here 1506 became effective again. Now, if I read this correct, any contracts that were signed after November 4th, 2010 had to comply with AB 1506, correct? So the only contracts in question are the ones in this little, say 3-month time period where they thought that they were going to have to do their compliance through the DIR, but that changed. So that's just that 3-month window. So now we're talking about potentially having a deadline for compliance that's another year out. I would suggest that most of those projects will have been completed by the time the deadline is in effect. So if they're going to comply, it seems to me they need to get, and it's going to be anything that's going to be meaningful, it seems to me that they need to do something sooner. Now, that's not to say that there couldn't be a project that fell through the cracks or a district, but if the districts were notified, were sent the email, then they should be doing something, because it's hard for me to believe that a district would, if they thought the DIR was doing the compliance, they've got to know something's happening. So from that point of view, it makes sense to me to move it up, because like I said, you could have had full schools built in that time frame. If you let out a contract August 1, 2010, and you don't have to have anything in effect till November 11th, 2011, that's well over a year. So I think since we're just talking about that window, it makes sense to to notify districts and for them either to hire a labor compliance firm off the website, or hopefully, any district that has ongoing projects, and it wasn't just a single project, would have to have something in place anyway. If they would have had a contract that they would have signed either before August 1st, 2010, or after November 4th, 2010. So I don't know if I'm missing something there, but
no, before you go, I think your point's well taken. In fact, what I was proposing, that when I looked at the regulations, and I wrote down here instead of November 1st, July 1st, but after I'm hearing everything, I think May 1st is more reasonable, given that we're out there, and I'm looking at page 233. The question that if we were to move with, on page 233, instead of having on the two sections of section 1859.90 and 1859.106, I would suggest that the November 1st date of 2011 be changed to May 1st of 2011, and that is keeping folks in notification of the LCP. The question that this action would not address is those projects after November 5th and on for that window. And that's what they were attempting to work out with the language that we really just got today. Arguably, we can bifurcate this, I think, and take this action now. And if the issue really surfaces of those 15 school districts that have an issue, they can come forward and we can take a look at them then.
I thought my question was, contracts that were signed after November 4th have to comply with the old AB 1506. So why does it apply to them?
I think the issue that Cash raises, and correct me if I'm wrong, is your view is that because there were no regulations in place, they should not be required to. And that was an issue the implementation committee looked at and could not find consensus. So what I'm saying is that is not something that we're going to excuse them for in this action, or should we, in my opinion. So the action that the board ought to consider now is moving forward, when do the new LCP kicks in? And I think your point is well taken, that going to November 1st of 2011 is too far forward. So we really need to move that closer to, I mean, it could be immediate.
I agree with you. I just thought my understanding was that 1506 went back into effect November 4th, 2010. So there were regulations in effect then.
Right.
That's correct.
Right.
So we would not have to do anything to that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, on this, when SB 2X9 was to go in effect, DIR did a number of things to communicate over a period of months to get ready for this. Cash doesn't believe it's good governance to be able to change direction in one day and expect compliance to occur after a long period of readiness for a new law. So we believe that something, as we're proposing, is reasonable to give a notice, because maybe there was something that was sent out by DIR, but this is the entity that provides funding, and this is the entity that does the audits to make sure that districts are compliant. When 1506 began, we asked this body to basically intervene because DIR has no allocation board to provide input to it. And through this board at that time, we brought together a communication that made things work. And that's what we're asking for here. We believe that 1506 does apply. We believe, as Ms. Morris said, that this has been a confusing time. And what we're asking for is for a communication, because that has not occurred, from this body to go out. And again, we started asking for this right after the November 4th date occurred, and we realized there was an issue. So we're asking for you to be patient with districts and not to be harsh in saying immediately you need to be compliant when they were expecting that they needed to be compliant with a completely different law. So that we think that's reasonable. And what we do is we communicate the actions of this board, the direction of this board. And again, we're not asking for a regulation change. And I appreciate what you said there a minute ago. You said you wanted to bifurcate, and I think that may satisfy your staff and be helpful. But thinking that
I'm not looking to satisfy my staff. I'm looking to provide what people are looking at. So it's not really satisfying staff.
Okay. Well, the intent is, my comment was, they brought something forward to you, and I've brought something a bit different with Mr. Diaz. And so as not to confuse things, if you were to take the action of those projects that were in that window period, that's one thing. If there is direction that we're suggesting here, even if it was simply directing your staff to communicate with districts that you need to be in compliant by this date, then we will communicate with districts as well. They pay attention to our communications to say, you really need to put this in place. The board has recognized that there's been inaction and a lack of communication, and that we now as the allocation board are saying, please get this done by this time frame. That's what we're recommending to you.
Mr. Harvey and then Mr. Hagen.
This is a very healthy and worthwhile conversation. I mean that, but it is not an easy one. I'm wanting to know why we need regulations at all. Why can't we communicate simply directly with school districts Because on the one hand, I am not wanting to create forgiveness for districts that should be complying, and I understood that one of the elements of Mr. Duffy's proposal is it brings more projects into the forgiveness. We really need to be looking at those projects that were in the window period only. So, I don't know if regulations are necessary either. Why can't we simply communicate? And I say that knowing full well that we haven't had the best of luck with the Office of Administrative Law getting regulations approved timely. So we can be whipping off very quick time frames, and it languishes in another body. We don't control that. In fact, we've had some angst over some very necessary changes in the seismic area. I mean, ye gods. So if we can do it administratively without involving another body that may take months, I would prefer doing that. And personally, I would prefer only addressing those projects that Ms. Buchanan referenced, those that were caught in that no man's land. Everybody else should have known what the rules are. Ye gods.
Could I suggest then that what would make sense is to deal with those projects, but in a letter to districts explain that, you know, this is the date for those projects, but all projects, you know, funded through Prop 47 or 55 are expected to comply with AB 1506. I think that's really what we're saying, right?
Yes.
Mr. Hagman.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. And this does bring up a lot more questions than solutions out of here. I mean, why we can't actually physically write a letter when we change something as major as this to get someone to sign that says they received that notice and give them compliance. It's taken us 4 months to address something that happened back in November. That goes to the system again. That, you know, an email or posting something on the website isn't the best way to communicate with anyone doing this stuff. But I also know from, you know, previous contracts that anything, you know, I don't know if we have different forms, but you sign for acknowledgement when you have your projects updates. You have all these different things. If you do a change order, God, it's probably 200 sheets of paper you have to fill out to make that change order, put a door one place to the other. There's no way that we have any way to back from the time November 4th to current that our office or the rules have been changed up here when you start pulling funds down, that you sign acknowledge that things have changed. And especially if we had that big allotment back in December, the $1 billion plus, I hope the rules were very clear for those who took that money, that the rules were in place. And, you know, I think some of these suggestions are pretty much the same thing. I think we should basically write a letter, you know, do whatever regulations we have, write a letter to each person who has a project, then in time in question, say, where are you at this point? Are you in compliance? Are you not? Have them signed, have something on record. Anybody that falls out of that, then we can deal with them separately based on the circumstances and try to figure it out. But to have, you know, months to go on and make new rules on top of old rules, you know, to, like you said, Scott, to basically make a phone call, or not a phone call. I want everything in writing. I mean, you have to document everything as a contractor very much. Yeah. Everything's documented. To send out some kind of documentation, say, where are you at? This is there. But that should have been done since November 5th, probably, way back when. But come back and say, where are you at right now? Are you in compliance? Are you in trouble? Let's work with you now to bring you in compliance if you're not in compliance, but do so very much hands-on versus making more rules that you have to propagate out and make sure, well, I didn't get the second rule that changed the first rule, I didn't get the notice. It seems like it gets more complicated versus doing the one-on-one handout stuff.
Let's hear from our attorney before we hear from us, executive officer.
Mr. Chairman, just a couple of items I wanted to bring up. One of them is just a point of order. I'm looking at the way this item in tab 13 is drafted, and it looks like, as far as what's on our agenda, is either to approve it or not approve this specific regulation. I'm not clear that we can make a modification to the language that's already been here, but we can decide to put it over for another meeting. If this had options to it, or if it had something to change these parameters, I'm a little nervous about us ad hoc changing the language of the reg here as this item is set.
So procedurally, staff makes recommendations, and as a board, we have to take that recommendation or nothing. We can't alter the recommendation one way or the other.
I think the item can be drafted in a way that would have allowed more options to the board. This one doesn't seem to give us a whole lot.
Change the date.
Ms. Silverman?
All we're recommending is changing the date. I think everyone's comfortable with that.
Yeah, changing the date from November 1st to May 1st, and even though Mr. Harvey's point is well taken, that the Administrative Office of Law may not review this until sometime in the summer, we will then go public in saying we do want to have this in May.
I just wanted that as a consideration on that.
All right. Good point.
The other issue is just to make clear to the board that the original AB 1506 and this statute in the labor code, it has certain requirements on the board as far as auditing, and that was a lot of the reason why we were looking more for certainty of how we would go back and audit to find whether or not there's compliance with that statute. We have the statute does provide this board some flexibility as far as the way I interpret it, provides some flexibility on how we carry out that duty, but the board has a duty to make sure that there's a labor compliance program in place. And that's why these regs were suggested in a way to make certain to the school districts when we're going to be looking for compliance, since there was this confusion as far as the change in regulations.
So you're looking at the regulations as more of a force of law sort of thing for audit purposes?
If AB 1506, yes, it does require us to do an audit for labor compliance.
Okay. Ms. Silverman, the suggestion has been made, can this be done administratively and not have regulations or amend existing regulations to add? I think the board has been pretty vocal that we do want a labor compliance program retroactively and prospectively.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, we have been communicating since the repealing of the regulation. So we've been doing it by new building blocks. We have a monthly publication out there. We also have been sending email blasts to school districts, especially with those one recently awarded on the apportionment. So that communication has been ongoing about if you have been awarded Prop 55 or 47 funds, that you have to have a labor compliance program in place. So I just wanted to clarify that. But as far as administratively, I think that's something that obviously we can do, and if there are issues that come up, we can raise and elevate those issues to the board prospectively.
So for clarity, are you suggesting that we
chair.
can, I'm sorry.
Just put me in line.
Okay.
Go. I don't go. I mean, I wanted to follow up on what Mr. Harvey said, which seemed like the best way out, if it's something that we can move ahead and do, which is send a clarifying letter that from November 5th on or upon repeal, the 1506 is in effect and has been in effect, and that if districts have not been in compliance, they're expected to be in compliance for audit purposes by May 1st.
Ms. Sharp, will that work?
I mean, I would make that as a substitute motion.
Well, actually, we haven't had a motion since
Yeah,
we didn't
I
really
thought
know what
you-
we wanted to do.
No, you
What
had
I
a motion.
suggested,
Did you?
I suggested I would entertain a motion that takes on the attachment, the amendment to the regulations, but rather than November 1st, for the point brought by Ms. Buchanan, that we make that May 1st. And that would be the motion that I would entertain. You're coming up with, and then the question was, can we do it administratively instead of the regulatory process? And I guess I'm concerned that while administratively we can convey the message of what the expectation is, does that give the auditors enough force of law to compare it to? Do they have a big enough 2x4 when they have to go audit? And I don't know the answer to that question.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes.
You, through the actions of this body, you have taken great steps toward audits and clarifying that there should be an audit guide, so that from the beginning of a project on, a district knows what to comply with, and that's been an issue in the past. What our suggestion is, with the language that we provided to you about May 1st, is that your direction to staff could be in a communication to districts that the audit guide will reflect that May 1st, kind of in the direction, I think, of Senator Hancock's comment a few minutes ago, on or before May 1st, for audit purposes, a labor compliance program will be in place within the district for projects that have been funded that are 47 to 55 projects. That avoids this whole question of how long the Office of Administrative Law has to look at this. Maybe you go through the regulatory process because it's something that you must do. But there is a communication that this will be in the audit guide. Districts know that they have to comply because an audit will take place. Looking for an LCP.
Mr. Davis, does that satisfy?
Well, just to be clear, the concern was not that the auditors have power to look for LCP. Right now, they've got a lot of power.
Okay.
And right now, if we leave things just the way they are, technically, those who don't have an LCP in place that left their contract after November 1st, November 5th, would be found out of compliance. The purpose of the regulation is to add a little time for easing into getting their LCP into place because of the confusion. This would give a clear indication that, hey, an auditor can't ding me for not having, on November 5th, not having my LCP in place. I had until, either May 1st, July 1st, whatever date we decide on, to get that in place. I had it in place by then. Auditor goes back and looks at it. Yep, you did. You didn't have. Don't have to look to see that you had it in place on November 5th.
Mr. Chair.
Is that clear?
Yes.
I move that we take attachment A, we change the date, and we vote on this in order to support what Mr. Davis says, that the auditor has something in place when all of us are gone, because this will be 6 or 7 years from now, that there's a date in place. That's the date. There's no question about whether it came in a letter, whether it was an email. It's a reg. And that way it's absolutely clear for the auditor to go back and say, this is labor compliance and this is the date.
Is your motion for November 1st or May 1st?
May 1st.
Okay. I have
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Ms. Sharp?
May I add one comment? The date also appears on attachment B on page 1 of the
Be a
5005, so we would
corresponding-
need to.
We'll do the corresponding. So
page.
we'll be both items. So if it's okay with the
Absolutely.
mover and the second, that we do that. Okay. Staff, do you have any other words of wisdom before we move forward? I think we beat this to
death.
Does anybody have a... Yes. Okay. It's been moved in second. Having no further comments.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Green, does that take care of only those window projects or after the window?
According to this is
It's
the window. The window.
Only the window projects, so everybody else is bare, which means that the issue that we brought before you remains unresolved.
No, everyone else is supposed to be compliant with
Anyway, exactly.
Yes.
So we didn't want to give them any more time.
But which is the issue that we brought before you, that if they're supposed to be in compliance with AB 1506 by November the 5th,
No, they're supposed to be in compliance at the time the contract, any contract after November 5th must be in compliance with AB 1506. It's just the ones in the window where there was that uncertainty that we're giving the extra.
And if any district is found to be out of compliance and they have legitimate reason, they're welcome to bring it up to the board and appeal their case. And it should be no more than 15, is my understanding. Okay.
4 hours of discussion.
Call the roll, please.
Senator Hancock.
Aye.
Assemblymember Buchanan. Assemblymember Hagman. Scott Harvey.
I follow this question.
Kathleen Moore.
Aye.
Lynn Green.
Aye.
Pedro Reyes.
Aye.
Carries.
Okay. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you.
Can I follow up just with some guidance letter for those? Because I do have a concern that was brought up. Okay, we addressed those projects in the window now.
Mm-hmm.
Did our forms meet the criteria on November 5th if anything was signed out? I'm sure they did in December or something like that. There may be a fudge thing. We don't need a regulation with anything, but can we at least address that to staff so they have some guidance to say, can you give some lenience to those contracts after November 5th to December and give them some time to comply because of the confusion that these rules and regulations that
How about in
What I would actually suggest, and I brought this up at the implementation committee meeting, is that we address these window projects now, but the discussion that was brought up by the building trades and cash, that it go back to implementation, have staff look at if there is any issue, if there needs to be, or come up and address that, or as the chairman has stated, if we find that there are projects that have come up, maybe then staff brings a recommendation to the State Allocation Board at that time for discussion.
Okay. Yes.
If I may, I would prefer to hit it head on, and that is that I understand, Ms. Silverman, that a letter went on the 1.8 or 1.7 billion that we've done in December and January from your response, that in the funding letter to them, this issue was emphasized. Is that correct?
We did notify them that they had to be compliant with the requirements.
Okay, so there was one communication.
And there was also notification in our monthly building blocks as well, our monthly publication.
What in support of Assemblymember Hagman's direction, can we send another letter to all those projects, 47 and 55, that were funded, and emphasize again that they are subject to the LCP, And then, as the chair said, if there are concerns that get raised because of that, we're just made aware and can deal with them on a case-by-case basis.
We'll certainly do that.
Is that okay?
Yeah, and just follow up question. I assume there's contracts that we signed or they signed for the monies. Did all that language for the compliance, was in there for anybody who signed up after November 5th? Was that in the physical documents they would sign to apply, or when you do the grant letter? All that stuff was in there, right? The forms? Okay, so immediately on November 5th, that was in the forms. Okay.
No
Oh,
change.
no
Forms
change
didn't
to the
change. Forms didn't change.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Because I have to go to another.
Okay. All right. We can go to that.
Tab 15.
No, lift the call on the minutes. Ms. Hancock.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to move the minutes with a correction to the paragraph about Ms. Oropesa and what she said to the board.
What page are we looking at?
It's page 1 of the minutes.
Okay.
It's 3 paragraphs from the bottom. It simply is not clear. If we could simply say, Ms. Oropesa requested the board wait to hold the election of officers, notwithstanding the rules and procedures adopted in December, until such time as the new designee of the Department of Finance would be present the February meeting of the SAB. I think it would be much clearer. She acknowledged the rules. She asked, not because she was confused, but simply because she was not going to be there permanently, that we delay until February, which we did.
SAB is added.
Yeah, can we get the recommended changes and we can modify the minutes?
Okay. I wasn't here, so I'm
Yeah, we'll
looking
look
to
at
you.
it.
Is that the
Yeah.
accuracy?
We'll look at the transcripts to confirm.
Okay, can we, look
So I
at the
moved the
transcripts?
minutes with that.
Actually, they've been moved in seconds, so we would have to,
Check the transcript. If we decide that she was really confused and said all the garbled things, you can put that in.
problem if the minutes have been moved in second. We put up the vote, and if we amend the motion, we would have to take a new motion, a new second, and I don't have enough members voting because a couple of us have to abstain.
Oh, well, so you're saying if you wouldn't mind checking and just.
Would you check the accuracy, please? And
That would be.
would that be okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Hancock. So please lift the call.
Then it would be Senator Hancock.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All of a sudden, I don't have the votes to amend the motion. Okay. Yes.
I don't know if it's good for our comments at all, but since I'm still in the learning phase of this thing, I noticed there were 3 different ways to get out contracts and bids, and if this could just be maybe at some point down the road, we're not so busy, if we could just maybe have a little staff presentation, the lease back, the direct, all these different kind of things just for us new members. Thank you.
Absolutely. And you chairs too. Thank you. Okay, item 15, 3-month workload.
Yes, actually, we're presenting the 3-month workload. The first sheet reflects the March 23rd workload. Again, those are potential items that we're moving forward. And obviously, with new assignments, they'll be added onto the workload list as well. The following page represents April.
Let me go back to page 240. The seismic update, does that address Ms. Hancock's issue that she brought up earlier?
That's
okay.
correct. That will
Thank
address
you.
her issue.
All right, because she did request that, and I want to make sure she shows up. Okay. Thank you.
And then 241 reflects the April workload as it stands
Okay.
now. And then the following page represents the May workload.
Would that be a good time to bring the issue of Mr. Hagman in terms of
A presentation?
a primer on the contracts?
Yeah, we can definitely.
Okay,
put that in.
just so we go there. Is there any public comment on this issue? No, thank you. Tab 16, board meetings coming up.
We did hear from Ms. Buchanan that obviously the breaks in the summer potentially may have impact our July meeting, so something for consideration. Because the legislative summer break is between July 15th and August 14th, and we had slated here our July 27th board meeting, and that may have some impact.
I may be the only one.
Yeah, just wanted to
Nobody
share that
else?
with you.
No, that's good.
When it gets closer, we'll have to.
We need to survey the other members as well.
The July meeting? Is that
Yes, yes. So let's do a check on that for purposes of quorum as well. Okay? Anything else?
That's it.
All right. Any public comment on any of the items or upcoming comments or criticism of the chair or anything like that? Okay.
Oh, how about all of the above? Very quickly, I would like to make certain those in the audience, if they weren't at the cash luncheon, and board members who may not have been able to be there, Kathleen Moore received a very special recognition. It's an honor. It's an honor to receive an award. It's the Murdoch Award, and it's given only once a year. And her service to cash and to school children and to instruction management was duly acknowledged, and it was a very special award. And I want to acknowledge that and congratulate her yet again.
Congratulations. Excellent. Mr. Duffy.
Thank you. And before my comments, thank you very much, Mr. Harvey, for recognizing Kathleen Moore. It's the James L. Murdoch Award in the honor of Jim Murdoch, who passed away a number of years ago, who's just an icon here in Sacramento and representing school districts. And speaking of another icon is certainly Kathleen Moore fits into that category. I had wanted to talk to you about two items, send a communication to you on these items. The first item is the general site development allowance. This board, I believe in June of 2010, readopted the allowance. The allowance was established as a temporary item for review by the board a number of years ago, and it has continued on. You reestablished it, but for whatever reason, it hasn't gone through the Office of Administrative Law process.
Oh, my point exactly.
And Mr. Harvey's point exactly, and I was thinking of that earlier, Mr. Harvey, when you talked about it. I believe, and your staff could potentially clarify this, but I believe that since it hasn't gone through the process, that it's no longer in effect, although the board's intent was that it be. So projects that are approved January and after do not have that general site allowance included. And this was put in place as a remedy after a study that was done by OPSC a number of years ago. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. I don't know how we can fix that, but we want to make sure that that's put in place. Secondarily to this, but as important, the Department of General Services convened a group referred to as the Expert Work Group. A number of things were suggested to improve the program and processing. And one of the items, and this was discussed before the board in November, was to take that same general site allowance and make it permanent. So there was an underscoring of this by the expert work group. So if you could ask your staff to look at that, and we can see what the remedies may be for districts that haven't received that funding. So that's one. And I realize that's additional work for your staff, but it was an intent of the board that this be put in place, and maybe it's because of not having enough staff that occurred. The second communication to you was an item that I talked to you about at the end of the last meeting last month, and it's the project information worksheet requirement that's within your regulation. This was put in place to inform the discussion that the board would have about increasing the pupil grants for new construction only. This was added into AB 127, the bond bill that gave us Prop 1D. The intent there was to, again, referencing back to a study that was done by OPSC, it found the grants to be wanting compared to the prior program. And so there was a 6% provision provided under the statute, so the board could consider increasing the grants January 1st, 2008 and thereafter. And OPSC said what we need to do is to query districts, get information from them, and this project information worksheet was put in place. The point is the worksheet, and we had some issues with the worksheet and the one study that was done, but the worksheets are still being collected. There's still a requirement they be submitted by districts. There's a good deal of work that goes into that, and the board has not used them, and OPSC hasn't used them for any consideration of increasing the grants. So we're asking that you bring the regs back and dispense with the requirement of filing those PIWs.
In the absence of the PIWs, how would that study that was done would have been conducted?
In the absence of the PIWs, and first of all, we believe that they're a flawed document, so they don't provide accurate information, and the study that was done was also flawed for other reasons. But you could, as a body, if you chose to, ask for an entity such as the Center for Cities and Schools at Berkeley as a separate independent entity. I think this board has heard from that entity at least twice, asked them to conduct the study. But again, the board has not, Mr. Reyes, looked at an increase in the grants since 2008. So in essence, it's been a moot point. The law provides the board may increase the grants. We've talked to the board about that, but because of all the other issues that the state has had fiscally that are now in your lap within the Department of Finance, the board hasn't made an increase. It did make the increase in 2008, the very first year it could. But it wasn't based on PIW because the PIW did not exist at that time.
Ms. Buchanan.
I actually think both, as you said, both studies are flawed, so to do one versus the other doesn't necessarily get you a better result.
Right.
When I look at, I think this is a deeper subject that we need to look into and really think about what is it that is included. What is it that is included in the grant amounts? Because we talked at one meeting about was it ADA or whatever, where you had an add-on where we know if you're taking it from construction now, it should be part of it. As I recall, the study, if it's the one you gave me, when I say flawed, it would have been more expensive to build an elementary school than a high school. Looking at the grants didn't. So I mean, I think we need to take a look at the grant amounts, but we've got whether you have a committee that studies it or whatever, but I think it's a fairly in-depth discussion. I think Ms. Moore brought up the very first meeting I attended at a SAB. We were talking about, should you have the same grant amounts for portables or relocatables as you do for permanent stick-built construction. So I would like to see something like that happen as a deeper conversation in terms of what's fair and reasonable, and take a look at not just the base grants amounts, but take a look at the how we administer that program in general.
And if I may respond, Ms. Buchanan, the issue that you brought up, and we have talked about this, would really go beyond the scope of authority of the board because of the statute and the grants, and that the grants aren't separated for add-ons as opposed to full-ons. But the issue of the project information worksheet is that districts are filling them out, and it's for naught. They're not being utilized, and it is work for districts. Some districts pay for construction managers and others to come in and do this work. So if they're filing them and they're going into a file cabinet, nothing's being done with them. Your staff is not at the strength that it was before. Districts are decimated, as you well know, and so can we dispense with this? It's not doing anything.
Well, I'd be willing to have a conversation. I'm just saying I don't think changing the grant amounts at this is something that's simple that can be done at just one meeting. I think it takes a more thoughtful process.
I agree
So
with you.
could we agendize that for the next meeting is our request?
I would rely on staff to,
I'll look at it.
you and the vice chair get to
Yeah,
determine.
Vice Chair and I will have that conversation, what goes on the agenda. Thank you
Okay.
for the input, though. But Ms. Moore?
I have a couple of comments. One, concerning the project information worksheet. I will say, having been on the board when all that was occurring, that it was in the effort of advising on the AB 127 increases or not, because we had the problematic issues around the studies. And that it is an incredible amount of work for school districts to do. And I also, as a board member, would want to hear, maybe, as you say, in a greater context around this. But if we're asking school districts to provide information that we're not utilizing in a time period when it's very tough for school districts to operate, period, we should ask ourselves that question. And if we're not going to utilize the information, I don't think it should be required of school districts. Now, if we are seeing that we'll utilize that information in the future and that it will assist with these types of issues, then by all means. But it is onerous, and we have not taken up an AB 127 discussion ever since it's been put into place. So I think it's a point well taken. The second one is the grant adjustment. I know as a board, we did that in June so that we could make a January date. And it's very disappointing to understand that we're not. And so I have a couple of questions. I didn't know this was occurring. Are we not providing that grant increase to all those that just got funded?
The grants are based on the regulations in effect at the time of submittal. So the projects that would be affected would be the projects after January 1st. The regulations sunsetted December 31st, so between January 1st and now, or until the regulations become effective, there is no regulation that is effective that gives them additional general site.
Did we leave that open, or is that because of full and final, those districts are out of that funding amount?
I don't believe we left them open for these increases.
Okay, so that's a problem for those districts. So everybody that got funded in December has the amount for general site, and everybody that has the increase, and everybody that was funded in January does not. Is that correct?
No, they probably did because they were submitted when the regulations were in effect.
Submitted. Okay,
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
So it's only applications that are submitted
now. Okay.
Until the regulations become effective.
And then when do we anticipate the regulations to be effective?
There's a 45-day public comment period that ends April 14th.
And then when would it come before the board?
It came before the board last June.
No.
It would be
Oh, it'd be effective in April?
Effective.
So we have a window period of January to April.
Well,
that's
they
called in?
take public comment, and then they'll go through the process to make them effective.
So it could be 30 days after April?
Yes.
So we have a window of January to May. That's a problem. When we, as a board, I know, took action on this in June in anticipation of that January board meeting. So it didn't come to fruition because of the process or whatever, but I think that we owe those districts that are in that time period some resolution. And I would ask that we have that as
And I think that could be working with legal counsel, maybe a legal discussion, because they were submitted in a timely manner. Once they're approved, are those regulations in effect where they would backdate till January because they were in a timely manner? So I think that's something
Can we ask legal, through the chair, ask legal to look at that?
Please.
Thank you.
Well, and just you reminded me of something, Ms. Moore. The last time that this occurred, I think the board took action at a November meeting, and in anticipation of the sunsetting occurring in January, the following January. So there was a shorter period of time than the period of time that we're discussing here. So I'm really confused as to why this has occurred. If we're talking about, we're in February now, so this is 8 months later. So I don't understand why there would have been a lack of follow-through there. And if I may ask the question of your staff, so if any were projects that were funded today, were they absent this funding of the general site allowance?
No, they included general site.
They're included, but anybody that applied for anything after January 1st would not receive that until these regulations are in place. So you have an opportunity to remedy that. Is that accurate?
Yes, between now and when they become effective, unless there are changes in regulations that have a retroactive provision, they would not be eligible for general site.
General site at all?
Right.
General
that
site at
section-
all, no general site funding.
The additional grant for general site allowances that we have in regulations sunsetted December 31st. So they
That
would
is a very significant issue. I mean, general site, that is a significant component of a project. And I think that we should look at the resolution for these projects because it was fully the intent of the board back in June. I think with a 6-month period for regulatory action. I know that, there's been a lot of impacts on government, but we fully anticipated this, and this is a significant part of a budget for a project. And I don't believe that projects from January till whenever this becomes effective should have to suffer the delay of this regulation. So I would ask that if legal counsel could look into it through the chair and report back to us at the next board meeting. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars for each project.
To be clear, I will look into what the regulations we have currently in process and how they can be interpreted as far as these applications that were received since January 1. And if there's any other alternatives, I'll see what they are.
Thank you.
And not to delay this too long, but I want to make it perfectly clear that OPSC staff processed this timely. There were other hiccups in this process, but our staff did what they should have done and did it timely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Nothing? Adjourn. Thank you.
Is it